It all started with the fact that an important event was taking place in the palace, and everyone present tried to maintain order and traditions. At this time, His Majesty ate calmly, not paying attention to anyone focused exclusively on his meal. It seemed as if the girl had kissed someone. Everyone looked at her with open contempt, as if she had broken some unwritten rules. The emperor noticed that Melissa was late again, but she calmly replied that she was always a little late. After that, there was silence, tense and heavy, as if the air between them was filled with silent discontent. She had a terrible relationship with her father, as well as a complicated past, because the previous owner of her body was the heroine of a love story, the beloved of the emperor. This story began with the fact that the commoner Yuri, thanks to her abilities in magic, achieved recognition and was adopted by an influential baron. Over time, she managed to attract a whole harem of 4 handsome men, including the crown prince, which caused a storm of emotions among readers. She was also joined by a marksman, with a cold character but a devoted soul. One of her companions turned out to be a werewolf possessing wild strength and loyalty, capable of protecting her from any threat. The fourth was a scientist intelligent and mysterious, whose knowledge had repeatedly saved them from trouble and helped them move forward. They all fell madly in love with the heroine, because she seemed to them the embodiment of goodness, like an angel who had descended to earth. However, not everything was so simple, because the novel also had an antagonist, an important and dangerous figure, who influenced the entire course of events. She turned out to be the bride of the crown prince, possessing a sharp mind and enormous power of influence on those around her. In addition, there was the shooter's older sister, who felt a fierce hatred for the werewolves and did not hide her emotions. Now Melissa was eating, throwing food around. Her movements were careless, and the maid asked in confusion if her mouth was leaky. Melissa then asked where her brothers were, and was told that one of them had left on urgent business. She was informed that he had gone to people in danger, because he felt a duty to protect them. The child didn't even know that he had his own home, and this caused Melissa no small amount of surprise and concern. At that moment, the girl learned that Jake was the only heir, and she was sure that the emperor had no right to treat him like that. Melissa jumped up abruptly, knowing that even though he was her only son, he was always asking for something and always doing strange things without thinking about the consequences. She suggested that perhaps the matter was that he was the son of that very illegitimate woman, and if so, then as the only daughter, she would be quite content to move away. Melissa added that she came here thinking that they were dying of loneliness, but it turned out that she was very wrong. Everything looked quite normal. At this time, the emperor suffered because he had to endure the consequences of his previous mistakes, and strangely enough, all this no longer concerned the heroine. She thought about it for a long time, and after some reflection, she came to the conclusion that this life was actually not so bad, especially when compared to her previous hustle and bustle in college. Waking up, she immediately realized that she had found herself in a novel, finally escaping from that hellish student life, where there was neither peace nor air. Her forehead remained absolutely smooth without wrinkles, because she never allowed herself to get nervous over trifles and knew how to control herself. The eyes, huge and cat-like, shone with gold, like a maid in a shining outfit, and in their depths there lurked a special awareness. Her appearance was unexpectedly bright, almost like that of the neighbor's dog, causing a strange but memorable impression. She could have endured all this, but it turned out that she had reached a dead end. The situation had no obvious way out, and this threw her off track. Melissa simply dreamed of a calm and happy life as the Duke's daughter, where everything would be measured and without unnecessary worries. She didn't intend to play the role of a villain, but that didn't mean she would become a saint. Sometimes you have to be tough to survive, so she decided to act smart and act carefully to avoid making mistakes and getting caught up in unnecessary intrigue. Melissa was not interested in the men who surrounded her until she began to intersect with other people's destinies. In this form, her life was ideal. Realizing this, she typed something on a piece of paper, as if thinking through several steps ahead at once, as if she were playing chess. Her thoughts wandered far away, and she suddenly froze as if remembering something important, completely immersed in her thoughts. At that moment, her gaze caught on some detail. Something flashed before her eyes, and she instantly tensed up. After some thought, the girl decided it was time to start acting, and her plan began to take shape right in the letter. In this letter, She laid out the competition, pointing out that he was a child of the Empire and therefore should know his place. She was also interested in how he was doing there and wanted to know about his current situation, without any disguise. Even though summer was coming to an end, the bird outside the window still sang joyfully, filling the air with a sweet aroma. She intended to convey to His Majesty a request to annul their engagement, which she already considered to be broken. The last word in the letter turned out to be especially beautiful, as if it put an end to this whole protracted story. Melissa really loved him with all her heart, but now this guy had become a heavy burden for her, which needed to be gotten rid of as soon as possible. The reason was the card in the bouquet. There was someone else's name on it. She did not want to know the name of the lady with whom her fiancé had been spending hot nights lately. The maid noticed how the heroine was typing something on paper with a sincere expression on her face. The woman thought that the girl had completely lost her mind. She silently watched her and did not cease to be surprised by what was happening. This was already the 49th letter. It seemed that the girl had suddenly begun to write too much and too enthusiastically. Melissa told her assistant to send this letter. It was to be delivered directly to the imperial palace, addressed to the crown prince. The woman looked at her with surprise and didn't even immediately find what to say. It was getting tiresome for her, as she had done this dozens of times before. But Melissa was adamant and had no intention of backing down. The heroine added that if she didn't receive an answer again, she would bombard the prince with letters as much as necessary until he responded. The enraged maid went to carry out the order, and Melissa remained pleased with herself and her stubbornness. In any case, she knew she would carefully select her outfit for the upcoming meeting with Yuri. But inside she was sick. It seemed that Melissa was very nervous and was already starting to feel sick from everything that was happening. She found herself in a terrible situation. A couple stood in front of her, exchanging sweet glances, and she had to watch it. This couple was his wife and the crown prince of the empire, John Basilios. All this happened before he met Melissa. Under the guise of searching for true love, he behaved dissolutely and often created a lot of problems. He clung to every woman he met, to every girl who simply caught his eye. This meant that similar situations could arise again and again without stopping. Meanwhile, Melissa watched how her fiancé behaved and grew angrier with each new gesture. It infuriated her that he allowed himself to openly flirt with everyone who was nearby. She could no longer look at it without feeling sick and disgusted. At the same time, the girl seemed to even like it. They played laughed, while Melissa was forced to watch all this. It seemed as if his eyes were merely an ornament without meaning, without guilt, and without shame. They were so engrossed in each other that they didn't even notice her in their own bedroom. When Melissa heard about the crown prince's behavior, she thought that he was only capable of getting drunk alone, and only the real champions were left to trudge home in the middle of the night, feeling the bitterness of a life lived in an untimely manner and stupid decisions. No one knew that his main problem was his innate ability to seduce girls. At first, with phrases, she wondered how he had learned it at all. Suddenly, a girl turned to him and asked who was standing in front of them, clearly not recognizing him at first glance. For some reason, it seemed to her that his maid was standing in front of her, although nothing indicated this. Melissa almost laughed. Maids don't look like that. It seemed that the girl was either blind or just stupid. No maid could afford to wear such a luxurious and expensive dress, obviously custom-made. The prince only told her not to worry, because they had something more important to take care of. At first, he decided to find other clothes so as not to look ridiculous in this society. They started kissing even harder, and Melissa didn't understand why she was still putting up with it. Moreover, everything took place right in the crown prince's living room, which made the situation even more absurd. Then, the guy asked the girl to come with him, believing that it would be more convenient for them to be alone in another place. And at that very moment, these two were doing all this right before her eyes, without the slightest bit of embarrassment. Besides, she didn't come here herself. He himself told her to come, saying that he wanted to show her something, and judging by his upbringing and behavior, this was not the first time he had done something like this. It seemed like he really enjoyed doing things like that in plain sight. If you think about it, John Basilios didn't deserve even a drop of her angelic patience. Suddenly, she turned sharply to him, and only then did he finally turn his head. He who had previously simply ignored her suddenly showed interest and even surprise. Of course, she immediately began to insult him, and he could not help but react to this. The guy was stunned, because he always openly showed Melissa his mistresses. Usually this would end in a stormy scene and a fight, but this time everything went differently. She had never said anything out loud to him before, but now everything had changed dramatically. He stared at her and asked if she had gone completely mad with jealousy. She asked who would call their bride to watch her own humiliation, and she added that the fact that she didn't smash his head against the wall was already proof of her sanity. Of all the men in this damned affair, it was him she hated the most. Considering how vile his actions were, she couldn't understand how Melissa could ever love him. Melissa did not share these feelings at all, and did not feel any sympathy for what was happening around her. The guy noted that he knew about her character, but had no idea that everything was so bad. He said he never even thought that Melissa could have asked for such words on purpose. But apparently, the girl did not take his words seriously at all. She couldn't understand how he could behave nobly when he openly hugged others. It was as if he was completely confident in himself. Then she asked him if he wanted to hear some really cruel words. Melissa said she noticed he was a great kisser, and decided to give him a chance to show it off right in front of the dance floor. After all, in her opinion, he was ideal for such a vile type. He was shocked and immediately pulled away from her. Melissa clenched her fist and glared at him. Suddenly, she noticed something strange in his gaze. The guy seemed seriously agitated, his clenched jaw betraying his anxiety. There was a strange grimace on his face, and he looked like he was about to cry. Earlier, he even gave her a fawn, demonstrating his care. This man was brave enough to have affairs on the side, but now he trembled at the two words spoken. He seemed almost to cry. He always watched the fox's antics silently because he himself had never been its victim. Up until this point, he had felt safe. But yesterday, when she had taken out all her anger on him, it had come as a shock to him. After she woke up in this body, she was no longer the girl he knew. He hadn't yet managed to fully comprehend it, but he was already beginning to guess. She said that in that case, she would simply leave. If he despises her so much, then she sees no point in continuing to live like this. After all, she didn't understand what they could do just sitting next to each other in bed. Of course, it wouldn't happen quickly. In the novel, John falls madly in love with Juris and asks Melissa to break off the engagement quietly. His words came as a strong blow to the poor daughter of the Duke, as if she had been rolled over by a steamroller. She who loved him with all her heart could not come to terms with the separation. That's why she started avoiding him, crying and refusing to accept the prince's decision. Melissa didn't want to break up because she truly loved him. However, John later dumps her, publicly humiliating and destroying her reputation. But now, Melissa wasn't going to let that happen again. Therefore, she herself decided to break off this engagement in advance. She didn't understand why the younger girls and even her brother liked this man, because she herself couldn't bear even the thought of parting with him. The crown prince had no feelings for her and was openly cheating on her, and she saw no reason to hold on to him. It was clear that he was deliberately creating such scenes to force her to be the first to talk about divorce. And finally, she did it because deep down, she understood that the presentation itself was just part of a political game that had nothing to do with feelings. This man had a strong dislike for the police from the very beginning, and did not hide his attitude from anyone. No matter how many times the heir tried to persuade her to break up, she didn't want to hear about it, and she couldn't blame him for everything that was happening. All this is already losing its meaning, because in the near future, he will meet Yuri and everything will change. Considering how things were going, the girl decided not to bother them anymore and just step aside. She decided that the time had come to finally formalize the dissolution of the marriage, which they had both long been waiting for. After that, she would have no reason to approach Yuri, because he would meet an unkind fate, especially since she was the daughter of a duke. She didn't understand what exactly was holding her back, because she had absolute power and freedom of action. The cancelled engagement with John will not be an obstacle to a possible marriage in the future. She hoped that this act would not cause serious harm to her family or lead to condemnation. This meant that even if her fiancé was the crown prince, the dissolution would not have much consequence. She finally decided to take this step, which came as a surprise to her fiancé. The girl announced that she was ready to break off the engagement, and this left the guy truly surprised. He probably didn't expect to hear such an answer from her at that moment. And suddenly, he himself began to doubt, as if he no longer wanted to break off this relationship. The lady felt proud because she had finally said out loud what she had carried inside for so long. Suddenly, he began to object, arguing that their union could not be dissolved. He immediately left the girl whom he had just hugged and to whom he had been so affectionate. All this shocked Melissa. She did not understand what was happening until he begged her not to do it. Although he usually behaved with restraint as a prince, he now abruptly turned away from the one who stood next to him. He was so shocked that he even pushed his beloved away, and this came as a surprise to the girl. This whole reaction was a real shock to her, as if she had witnessed someone else's transformation. She didn't understand why he insisted that it was impossible to dissolve their union. Suddenly, the guy, clearly embarrassed, admitted that he was surprised by Melissa's behavior at that moment. The guy asked if something strange had happened to the girl, because she had suddenly started thinking about breaking up, which seemed completely unexpected to him. This question really seemed unexpected, and even a little strange to the heroine, but at the same time, it touched something deeply personal in her. However, this was not at all what he had been so persistently striving for, so it was difficult for her to understand why he was now trying to deny all this. Then she asked why he showed her all these scenes from his life full of mistresses if he did not intend to break off the engagement. She still asked him about the meaning of such behavior. Looking into his eyes, she could not catch the truth in his gaze, although perhaps it was sincere. If she had understood all this correctly and had no intention of leaving, she could not imagine what had made him behave so recklessly. Perhaps everything went according to a different scenario, and instead of the heroine, he fell in love with a completely different girl as if by accident. Although it was most likely just a ridiculous fabrication, there was still a chance that it was true. Our heroine no longer hoped for anything concrete. She asked herself out loud and noticed how the guy suddenly blushed deeply. He seemed not only to blush, but to literally begin to tremble, as if he were overwhelmed by feelings he could not control. He suddenly started shouting that he didn't want a breakup, and that it wasn't part of his plans even if it looked different. If he really didn't want this, the girl thought, trying to find at least some meaning in what was happening. Then she asked a direct question. Why does he constantly cheat on her if he still calls her his fiancée? The guy began to ask again in confusion why she assumed he was cheating, as if he himself did not understand what he was being accused of. Then she asked him for what purpose he did this. Maybe he just wanted to humiliate her, make her feel insignificant. It was at that moment that she realized that she had hit the very heart of what was happening, and this made it even harder for her. The situation even seemed funny to her. Everything was so absurd and stupid, especially his behavior in recent days. She finally realized that he was just trying to impress Melissa, and she was looking for a deeper meaning in his actions that wasn't there. The heroine noted that it was a disgusting way to win someone's attention, but admitted that it really touched her. It never occurred to her that her fiancé, for whom she felt so much tenderness, could force her to witness such scenes. After this, the girl felt bad for herself, because she felt that she had also not behaved in the best way. The heroine added that even though she was called a bitch from the old house, her heart can hurt, and now it really hurt. She had no decent words to express everything she felt, and she tried to remain silent so as not to lose her composure. At that moment, she had nothing left to say. He too realized how bad it was, and how much pain he had caused. Surprisingly, after this conversation, memories began to clear in Melissa's head, as if everything suddenly fell into place. This confused the girl, but she was already very close to the solution. John's scandalous affairs with other women were explained by the cruelty and stupidity of his fiancée. Because of his unflattering descriptions of the affair with that lady, Melissa's brother often became the target of criticism from others. She was subjected to many accusations, and the looks of those around her carried a cold contempt. Despite her outward resilience, she took all this very hard because she was not at all as indestructible as she seemed. Even in Korea, if a man cheated, the woman was still considered guilty, not the cheater himself. Then the guy said that he also had complaints, because Melissa herself was always pushing herself on him. It was as if she were stalking him, and that was what irritated him the most. Meanwhile, she was only trying to show concern and do something good for him. He stated that he was the real victim here, because she couldn't understand how difficult it was to endure all of this. His speech became more and more pitiful, and he began to howl like a lost puppy. That's the reason he kept silent all this time. He was trying to present himself as the injured party. He thinks that they were the same, But now Melissa has changed and become completely different. Meanwhile, John pretended that he was completely innocent and had nothing to do with it. Then Melissa admitted that perhaps she had indeed been pestering him too much. But she did it only out of love. She wanted to drink tea together and spend time. Sometimes they hugged, and for her, it was of great importance. Everything was perceived especially acutely. In her heart, she was sure that this was normal. After all, this is how it should be between lovers. She sincerely apologized if she caused him discomfort or interfered with him in any way. But in response, he only nodded stupidly, resembling a complete idiot. She had never met anyone as awkward and weird as this guy before. She also made it clear that this did not give him the right to cheat in front of everyone. He did not have such a right. Melissa was sure that he was taking too many liberties and mocking her feelings. When she received an invitation from France, she spent the whole day preparing her outfit, dreaming about this meeting. She was thinking about how to dress better, to really impress the guy and stay in his memory for a long time. Inspired by happiness, Melissa tried to look perfect, because every time after long separations, the same picture appeared before her. Such moments touched her soul deeply, because she carried her love for him deep within her, and without a trace. She often left with red eyes, unable to hold back her tears after their meetings. However, Melissa could not stop herself from reading the letters she received from the prince. They served as proof that at least for a moment he was thinking of her, and this faint hope warmed her heart. The girl did not understand why he was doing such terrible things and still refused to break their marriage contract. She couldn't understand why he really expected her not to want to end it all, because he seemed confident of it. He believed that she was head over heels in love with him, and therefore there was no need to expect a breakup. This attitude struck Melissa, and she felt as if she had finally grasped his train of thought. But suddenly, there was a heavy pause between them. Her reaction was so sharp that the guy seemed to be shocked. It was as if something inside Melissa had been torn apart with a loud roar. Anger overwhelmed her so much that in her mind she slapped him as hard as she could right in the face. But all this happened only in her imagination. Although unfortunately, she did almost throw an ashtray at him in a fit of anger. She tried to remember the names of artists or philosophers who had discussed human behavior in critical situations. Although she didn't remember their names, she sincerely wanted to find answers in their thoughts and asked for help. The girl stood strangely in front of him, massaging her temple as if trying to relieve a sudden headache. The guy couldn't understand what was happening to her and why she was behaving so strangely. And if there is even a drop of common sense left in her, then she must realize that this prince considers cheating left and right to be normal only because she loves him. He really thinks that he lives in ideal conditions where he can do whatever he wants without losing the girl's love. Even so, he continues to believe that she will still love only him. He began to calm himself down, deciding that the girl was simply angry, although this was far from the case. Melissa calmly replied that no, because she was absolutely serious about her words and had no intention of backing down from them. She silently pointed her finger at herself, then explained that she no longer loved him and did not feel the same way about him. The girl clarified that she did not want to live with him at all, and that her love for him had long since passed, and she was not going to return. What he heard was a real blow to the heart for the guy. He couldn't believe such words. The expression on his face gave Melissa a strange sense of satisfaction, as if she had achieved what she wanted. He seemed to have even forgotten to close the curtain, and now looked as if he had just learned that the earth was flat. Perhaps it was because he had received so much love and attention since childhood that he did not expect such a turn of events. In the past, Melissa was truly crazy about him, like a puppy believing in her boundless affection. Now everything is different. She has changed, and now his behavior only makes her irritated and tired. The guy tried to calm her down, but Melissa explained that feelings are fickle and can change at any moment. She added that since he talks so much about love being a man who shares a bed every night, he must consider himself an expert. But it turned out that she was wrong and very wrong. Everything about him caused only bewilderment. Melissa finally suggested breaking off the engagement and asked if he could at least give a reason for continuing the relationship. His body shook. He didn't know how to react to this, and he couldn't find a single word in response. He looked disappointed, as if it was only at this moment that he was really beginning to understand something. His behavior infuriated Melissa. She just wants to get rid of her status as the bride of this prince. She wondered if this fool would suddenly sit on the throne and how quickly he would destroy the empire. It looks like this will happen literally the next day. Not a stone will be left standing in the country. It must be admitted that the prince really does have a pleasant appearance. You can't deny him that. Everything he did and how he behaved seemed ridiculous to her now. Behind all that mask of charm hid an ordinary third-rate man who did not inspire a drop of respect. The slight veil of attractiveness had disappeared without a trace. What little sympathy she could once feel had dissolved completely. There was no more pity or understanding. It was a final internal decision, and there was no turning back. Despite his self-confidence, he crossed an invisible line that he should never have crossed. And it was this step that became the fatal mistake after which their relationship became irreparably damaged. Melissa was overcome with tension, which grew into real irritation. Her patience was exhausted. She could no longer hold back. Her breathing quickened from anxiety, and her blood pressure began to rise. Her body was responding to stress. At this tense moment, the guy's mistress, trying to leave unnoticed, suddenly slipped. She wanted to hide, but unsuccessfully placed her foot and lost her balance, trying to catch on the edge of the table. Losing control, she fell right next to the table and accidentally hit an ashtray. The fall looked awkward and clumsy, as if everything that was happening had suddenly turned into an awkward scene from a cheap play. Those who were nearby watched in amazement. This moment was so unexpected that even conversation stopped. Everyone just stared, disbelieving their eyes, as if what had happened had knocked them out of reality. The ashtray hit the floor with a distinctive crash and shattered into pieces. The sound was loud and sharp, breaking the already tense atmosphere of the room, causing everyone present to turn around. The guards reacted immediately. Hearing the ringing, they raised the alarm and turned to His Highness to check if everything was all right. Their voices sounded insistent and sharp, as if ready for action. The people in the room froze in bewilderment. All eyes were on the guy waiting for his reaction. He, not wanting to raise a panic, calmly made it clear that everything was under control, as if nothing special had happened. However, the guards did not calm down and entered the room, demanding an explanation of the situation. They wanted to know exactly what caused the noise. Their severity was felt in every movement. They were looking for the culprit. The girl was surrounded, ready to be detained, having decided that she was the one to blame for the incident. They reached out to her as if with the intention of grabbing her, as if everything had already been decided without her words or excuses. One of the guards roughly twisted her arms without listening to a word. She was shocked and just looked at the guy silently, not understanding why he was not doing anything and why she was already considered guilty. Her gaze fell on the ashtray shards, and it became clear how it all looked from the outside. In the eyes of those around her, she looked like a hysteric woman who had caused a scandal. This discovery was painful and unfair. The broken ashtray and her screams only reinforced this impression. The girl sitting on the floor in tears also confirmed this picture. Also, everyone was tired after the bride returned from her imperial vacation. Considering how Melissa had behaved before this development was not surprising. Seeing what was happening, no one thought that our heroine could be innocent. That's why she was tied up right away. She immediately asked to stop explaining that she had been misunderstood and that she had done nothing. Suddenly, the lover approached Melissa's boyfriend and crying said that she was very scared. He added that he was sorry she had to go through that. Our heroine was noticed, and the couple played a brilliant acting role. Everyone tried to make her out to be the villain, but no one even wanted to listen to her version that she did nothing wrong. She was led down a long corridor. Attempts to escape were futile. She was afraid of damaging her neck and the notes she carried with her. As she said goodbye, she looked angrily at her former lover, and he immediately became frightened. Come to think of it, this guy never apologized to her, and always played the role of the victim. The girl shouted after him that she would never forgive him. Meanwhile, she was returning in the carriage, and an ominous atmosphere reigned inside. Melissa came to this decision after much thought, and it was not about resentment. The groom had dealt her a blow, but she remained sane because she understood what would happen if Ivan ascended the throne. It is obvious that everything around will turn into ruins. He will simply destroy all spheres of life and society, and then condescend to the common people and say something unclear. Maybe people will still love him. There was a small hope that he would change after meeting in Yuri, but the heroine did not believe in it. Now everything has gone too far. He has lost his last chance to atone for his guilt, and even Yura will not accept him. On rare occasions, Ivan showed kindness to the police, especially during events they attended together. These were balls or other formal events. However, his forced smiles only worsened the misunderstanding between them. After all, he had to behave decently in public. And it was because of this that Melissa fell in love with him even more. He made the girl believe in her feelings, but the heroine could not allow nature to come close to the angel of the Priklajansky family. The only option left was murder. She saw no other solutions and didn't even want to look for them. Besides being a villain, she believed that this situation shouldn't be too difficult for her. She just needed to figure out where and how to do it so that she wouldn't have to hire assistants. Since the target was the crown prince, she had to be extremely careful and think through every step carefully. Suddenly, the carriage stopped abruptly. The young man happily announced that they were already there, but then he noticed that the girl was sitting with a gloomy expression, lost in her thoughts. He was frightened by such an unexpected state, and the heroine was distracted only after a few seconds. She was scared and didn't even immediately realize that they were already home. She felt the guy's hands shaking nervously, probably because of her stern look at that moment. The young man began to beg her not to harm people so recklessly, but she was already tired of listening to such requests. Suddenly, the guy seemed happy. Perhaps he thought he was about to be fired. However, this boy was not the one who should suffer at her hands, and she tried to smile to reassure him. But it seemed that her evil smile only increased the young man's fear. He began to beg her not to touch him, saying that he had a rabbit wife, and asked her not to deal with him. The girl was surprised. She just smiled, but at that moment the maid appeared. She innocently asked what was going on, as if she did not understand the essence of the situation, and tried to remain calm. At this time, His Majesty was in the library, immersed in working on important documents. The atmosphere was serious, and he was studying the papers intently, not noticing what was happening around him. Suddenly, his daughter came up to him, deciding to interrupt the lesson. She wanted to talk, and it looked like she had something important to discuss that required his attention. The girl knocked on the door and politely asked if she could take up a little of his time, as if afraid to disturb his concentration, but at the same time hoping for understanding and support. The emperor immediately turned his attention to her, interested in what exactly she wanted. His gaze became softer. He was ready to listen to his daughter and help her understand the issue. She also asked for advice from an experienced person, as it was important for her to get the right direction. The emperor pushed the papers aside, showing his willingness to listen and help. The only suitable candidate for the task at hand was the Duke, the PVD's brother. He was a man of influence and experience who could help in a difficult situation. The girl looked at the Duke, but suddenly felt a slight fear, as if assessing his strength and importance, realizing how serious this man was in their circle. Despite her relatively tall stature, she had to raise her head to look at him. The Duke was considerably taller. It made her feel like a dwarf, despite her natural confidence. She could not understand exactly how tall the Duke was, because with her own tall stature, she had to look up, and this seemed strange and a little uncomfortable to her. The man calmly asked what the girl needed from him, demonstrating attentiveness and willingness to help, despite his stern expression. Fantasy novels based on Vadim often have a predominantly male-dominated ideology, with male characters playing key roles and female characters serving as supporters or healers. In these stories, the healers are always women, which creates a certain balance where female characters emphasize the care and support of the main characters. A similar situation can be observed in our novel. Female characters bring light heal and support, while men face internal and external conflicts. The plot often includes reasons why some men become angry and resentful of life, and these circumstances shape their characters and actions, causing sympathy. The guy never paid attention to his first child, the police, although he was his firstborn, as if there was no connection or understanding between them. But Jake, the second child, and the first from the scene, caused special attention and care from the Duke, differing from the others, which gave rise to questions from those around him. The Duke generously showered Jake with attention and support, which made him stand out from the crowd because he had potential and deserved special treatment. The lady did not understand why the Duke cared about Jake and even invited him to study abroad. Such a move was unexpected and intriguing. As a result, Melissa saw her relationship with her father deteriorate to the point that they stopped talking to each other, which created a deep rift between them. Because of this, Melissa could not turn to her father directly and preferred to ask the Duke for help, counting on his understanding and support in a difficult situation. The Duke looked at her silently, without saying a word, as if assessing her and considering how best to respond to her request. The girl looked at him with caution, as if defending herself and trying to understand what his real intentions were and what awaited her next in this difficult conversation. Suddenly, the Duke simply walked through her as if ignoring her, which irritated the girl and made her feel like he was deliberately distancing himself from her. He seemed to be deliberately creating a barrier between them, shielding himself and avoiding contact, which made the girl very angry and made her feel uncomfortable and unappreciated. She turned to him again, expressing irritation and saying that she was not in the mood to be in the same room with him for long, but at the same time, she wanted to discuss a very important matter. The girl asked to give her a minute, explaining that the conversation was serious and required attention despite the tension and personal feelings between them. Hearing her words, the Duke was surprised, and this aroused his interest. The girl continued, realizing that she needed to quickly get to the point. She said that she would not drag out the conversation and would immediately get to the main point, demonstrating determination and a desire to quickly resolve the accumulated issues. She was just about to say something, but she was interrupted. Tension grew inside her because the words were hanging on the tips of her lips, but the time for explanations had not yet come. Suddenly, he asked if she would discuss all the issues right there in front of strangers, as if she was afraid of prying ears and conversations behind her back. He noted that it was impossible to have a conversation in the corridor, and suggested that they go into the living room, which he had specially prepared for their meeting, hinting at the seriousness of the upcoming conversation. The girl agreed without words, although in her heart she wanted to object and stay, so as not to show her uncertainty and confusion in the face of such an unexpected request. She couldn't understand why he needed to make everything so formal and solemn, why he was trying so hard to hide the conversation from other people's eyes. There was only one thing going through her head: just talk about this ridiculous engagement, but how to do that if the situation was causing so much tension and misunderstanding? Suddenly, an idea popped into her mind. Perhaps the Duke was going to do something unexpected or even dramatic, like in those TV series where everything gets out of control. She suggested that he could take a glass of water and pour it over his despised daughter, creating a scene like in the movies where emotions run high and no one remains indifferent. However, despite all the assumptions, the heroine could only wait and watch because nothing depended on her except patiently waiting for events to develop. The Duke asked for a few minutes before beginning his preparations. He wanted to think and sort out his thoughts so that he could approach the task as focused and prepared as possible for what lay ahead. A moment later, he changed his mind and decided that it would be better to show up 10 minutes before the appointed time. This seemed a more reasonable move in order to think everything through carefully and avoid rushing. After this, the Duke disappeared again, leaving Melissa in suspense and uncertainty about his intentions, which only increased the tension and anxiety in her soul. The girl couldn't understand what exactly he had in mind, but there was no choice, and so she simply waited, trying to remain calm and not show her excitement. Her thoughts were swirling around the terrible thought that before killing the crown prince, the Duke might decide to commit a cruel act against her as well. Perhaps everything would be decided quickly and irrevocably with him. However, the Duke invited Melissa into the living room, just as the prince himself had done earlier, creating a sense of importance and seriousness about the upcoming meeting. Despite a strong sense of danger, Melissa obediently knocked exactly 10 minutes before the meeting, as instructed, trying to suppress her fear and not let it take over her completely. They told her that she could now enter, and the girl, gathering all her will into a fist, opened the door and stepped inside, ready for any turn of events. Turning to the Duke, she was struck by what she saw. The furnishings and the people in the room made her think, and a strange feeling troubled the girl's heart. Suddenly, Melissa thought that this could be another surprise party thrown in honor of the birthday of her younger brother, who had been carefully hidden from her all these years, like a secret that she had to reveal now. The whole situation seemed like a nightmare to her, because there were only 3 people in their family, and she was not the only one who noticed the explosion of emotions, as if the factory of unicorns and pink snot exploded right in front of them. The girl couldn't understand why he was acting so serious and calm at the same time, but first, he asked her to sit down so that the conversation could start more formally and without unnecessary emotions. His solemn appearance only increased the tension in the room. Just like that, with his stony expression, he looked even more menacing and unapproachable than usual. The main character wondered if lightning had struck him while she was away in the hallway, because his mood seemed too gloomy and strange, as if something had happened without her knowledge. After a while, she finally decided to sit down on the sofa, trying to pull herself together and prepare for what she was about to hear, despite her inner fear and tension. Melissa wanted to get to the point of the conversation, almost saying the words, but something held her back, as if she was afraid to take the first step or break something important. However, His Majesty suddenly said that he had already prepared tea and sweets, asking her to enjoy the treat, as if trying to soften the atmosphere and distract from the tension. The girl was about to say something again, but the Duke interrupted her, not allowing her to turn around and controlling the course of the conversation, like a wary owner who does not want to reveal his plans. He added that he had heard that this tea was especially popular among young people, as if he wanted to show them that everything was safe and they should not worry about trifles. Melissa quickly realized that the guy simply did not want to listen to her and was trying to steer the conversation in his direction, ignoring her real feelings and desire to speak out. Moreover, it seemed strange that he brewed some kind of pink tea, which looked suspicious and made the girl even more distrustful of his intentions. Deep down, she wondered if he had spiked the drink. Melissa was terribly wary of the worst-case scenario. She was very afraid to even touch the mug, as the disturbing thoughts that the tea might be poisoned haunted her and prevented her from relaxing in this environment. Although his behavior seemed suspicious and distrustful, she could do nothing but agree to drink this tea so as not to create unnecessary conflicts and not aggravate the situation. She didn't know what else to do. All the options seemed risky, and refusal could lead to even more problems, so Melissa found herself trapped between fear and necessity. Meanwhile, his lordship continued to look at her with a serious and unwavering expression on his face, as if checking her readiness to follow his rules and not disobey. Finally, he decided to give her the opportunity to speak, as if he had been holding back his patience for a long time, and was only now ready to listen to her point of view and thoughts. He added that it had been almost 10 years since they had last communicated in this format, recalling the time that had changed them both, and the significance of that moment. She noted that they had breakfast together every day and always greeted each other warmly. It seemed to have become a habit for them, maintaining at least some connection between them in this house. However, he did not answer and remained silent, as if words did not matter. His silence was heavy, as if an invisible wall separated him from her, and she could not understand the reason for such a distance. It seemed like he didn't hear her at all, lost in his own thoughts or problems. She tried to get through to him, but it was as if he lived in another world, where her words simply didn't reach his consciousness. The girl sincerely wanted to understand and talk to find out what was going on inside him, but his coldness and detachment only increased her confusion and anxiety. Finally, Melissa decided not to hide her feelings any longer. She slammed her fist on the table and openly declared that she wanted to end the marriage, not wanting to endure this silence and alienation any longer. At that very moment, a stranger burst into the room, and the suddenness of his appearance made her very scared. Anxiety began to play in her heart because no one warned her about his arrival. Her fear was quite justified because the man looked strange and menacing, with a cloak hiding his face, which added mystery and tension to the air of the room. He was wearing a cloak, and his face was hidden in the shadow of his hood, which made him even more mysterious and threatening, and his sudden appearance upset the fragile balance of the situation. Suddenly, the man asked what was happening in the room, as if not noticing her or deliberately ignoring her presence, adding to the atmosphere of uncertainty and discontent. Judging by his clothes and demeanor, he was an irritated jerk who brazenly ignored Melissa's questions and concerns, and it soon became clear that he was her brother Jake, known for his bluntness. The main character coldly asked if the prodigal son had finally finished his wanderings and decided to return home after long absences and aimless travels. Jake was more than just a brother. He was considered Yuri's lover and the heir to the Duchy of Podobrati, which gave him a special status and many expectations from his family and society. In addition, he was a professional imperial mercenary whose skill was known to all. Whoever rebelled against the authorities died under mysterious circumstances, causing fear and respect. Lady Melissa did not fully understand the meaning of this man's existence and his role in the life of the family, as well as the reasons for his contempt for others and for his own sisters. In the novel, Jake often expressed hatred towards Melissa, and despite his young age, he already had a reputation as a ruthless and cold man who was feared and respected at the same time. He demonstrated the best results in shooting and witchcraft, but rarely appeared in public, preferring to remain in the shadows and not attract unnecessary attention to his person. When he appeared at official events, Jake always stood apart like an outcast hiding under a hood and trying not to interact with others, maintaining his mysterious image. This mysterious young man hid from strangers and did not like to show his face in public, preferring to remain in the shadows and not attract unnecessary attention to himself. Constantly wandering around different places, he almost never appeared at home, as if his life was connected with incessant movements, where home was only a temporary point. Melissa knew that with an appearance like his, it was impossible to remain unnoticed, and she could guess how many eyes were fixed on him when he appeared among people. However, she could not help but notice that her own inclinations were much more modest, and she did not have the luck with genes that seemed to have accompanied him from birth. Moreover, she was inferior in appearance to her brother, and no one would have guessed that they were related. There was a clear difference between them that surprised those around them. In the book, Jake was presented as a modest, cold, and silent, handsome man whose appearance and behavior attracted attention and caused admiration from many. Melissa always felt a special sympathy for this hero, who watched Eurus from his shadow, hiding his feelings and leaving a mystery for those around him. The boy was also interested in the meaning of all these ribbons that his father hung from the ceiling, trying to understand the meaning and reason for such decoration in the house. He noted that even a 5-year-old child would not have been so embarrassed by the sight of these ribbons. So horrific and ridiculous did this decoration seem to him. He also spoke harshly about the cheap drink his father bought, considering it humiliating, and urged him not to lose his dignity over such trifles. He openly scolded his father for these actions, hinting that it was precisely because of such trifles that he avoided coming home feeling uncomfortable in such an atmosphere. At this time, Melissa silently watched what was happening, not interfering, but at the same time trying to understand the hidden meaning of their words and reactions. No one suspected that Jake was able to speak at a speed of 10 words per second, like a rapper skillfully choosing his words and always staying on top. He admitted that he was tired of his every word being analyzed and discussed, and it was starting to really irritate him. Despite this, he couldn't help but notice that no one close to him actually listened to him, and this frustrated him even more. Long ago, he had pointed out to his father that Melissa was still a child, and if her room wasn't decorated with all sorts of pink things, she would make a real scandal. But that wasn't what he had in mind. The girl was puzzled, not fully understanding what was behind these words and why everything was so complicated in their family. She finally realized that all this confusion with ribbons and reproaches was the fault of her brother, who seemed to provoke such situations. Jake turned out to be even worse than she could have imagined, and his behavior reminded her more of the whims of a crown prince than a caring brother. In her eyes, her brother was far from the ideal she had once imagined, and his irritating actions gradually made her feel stronger. Jake was not at all what Melissa had expected. This discovery hit her so hard that it felt like someone was hitting her over the head, breaking all her previous expectations. Memories of her gray-haired brother came to mind. He was not as stupid and did not behave as unceremoniously as he now seemed, and this only increased her confusion and doubts. The Duke also surprised her because he only pretended to support his son, sat quietly, and listened to instructions. But in fact, it seemed he was idle and only formally participated in family affairs. However, Melissa tried to think positively, suggesting that perhaps Jake was simply more talkative around his family, and that he wasn't as much of a bore as he seemed at first glance. This could mean that her brother is a tsundere, a person with a closed nature who opens up only to those close to him and behaves reservedly and even coldly in public. Suddenly, the girl decided to contact him directly to understand what he wanted and why he came right now, trying to find at least some connection with this incomprehensible person. This surprised her because she expected a more serious and profound answer, but received only something much less significant and not very inspiring. Despite this, everything went without any serious conflicts. Melissa smiled and waved her hand, showing that she was ready to communicate, albeit a little cautiously. She asked him what he was going to do here, trying to understand what his intentions were, and whether she should expect anything useful or important from him at all. In response, he looked at her with obvious contempt, and his face expressed such impatience and discomfort, as if he urgently wanted to go somewhere, not wanting to explain himself. It seemed like this guy was just ignoring Melissa and didn't want to have anything to do with her, which clearly indicated that there were problems in their relationship. She quickly realized that he had a disgusting character and was incapable of even having a normal conversation with her, which only exacerbated her irritation and misunderstanding. The guy silently turned away from her, not trying to explain or justify anything, leaving Melissa alone with her thoughts and the feeling of alienation. However, Melissa decided to repeat her question, "Why did he come?" and added that if he did not have important things to do, she would ask him to leave the room, not wanting to waste time. She hoped that he would understand her hint and leave, but he stood there not reacting to her words in any way, as if not noticing her request. Melissa was already starting to lose her patience and was waiting for him to finally leave, but he remained motionless and silent, causing even more irritation. Suddenly, he looked at her and finally spoke, which came as a surprise to the girl and slightly changed her attitude towards what was happening. She immediately asked to address her with great respect, reminding that she would not tolerate disdainful behavior and required basic polite communication. Melissa remembered that Jake and her fiancé Ivan had been friends since childhood, and it was this friendship that had helped her brother strengthen his ties with the imperial family, which gave her hope for a positive outcome. However, after their friendship was destroyed because of Yuri, the situation escalated and the relationship became extremely dramatic and complicated, which cast a shadow on the entire family. The brother said that he was already aware of all the events and insistently asked Melissa not to break off the engagement, emphasizing the importance of preserving the union for the common good. Now, Melissa realized that it was her brother, that same idiot chair, who reported everything to her enemy, which made her life even more difficult and caused a feeling of betrayal. The prince begged Jake to talk to his sister and convince her to change her mind, and our heroine was sure of this. This dialogue could change a lot in their destinies. Melissa thought of that guy again, and the thought alone gave her a feeling of intense dislike, as if something inside her was shrinking. This feeling almost caused physical pain in her head. His behavior and presence always irritated her, and whenever thoughts of him surfaced, she immediately began to get a headache, as if her body rejected the very idea of his presence nearby. However, now she began to understand that perhaps the guy came here at the request of Ivan the groom, which made the situation even more complicated and unpleasant for her. This version seemed the most plausible, especially if you remember his piercing gaze, which seemed to say that she had forgotten something very important here. And this was no accident. Jake the brother was given a task by his father to convey the prince's request, but at that moment, he unexpectedly saw his sister and felt confused by the unexpected meeting. Meanwhile, Ian's assistant reported where the Duke was, and it was this information that explained the outburst of anger with which he burst into the room ready for conflict. Uncle Yakov would have listened to his son attentively, and given that the police could not disobey the will of the head of the house, her plans to separate from Ivan would have been completely destroyed. Now they were all together in one room, and the Duke could hear everything with his own ears, which added tension and complicated the situation even more. Melissa found the guy's behavior funny, as if he suddenly realized that she suspected something important, and now his actions became more wary and unnatural. She thought that this guy thought too highly of himself, since he allowed himself to tell her who and how she should be, without taking into account her feelings and opinions. Melissa made it clear that he should not interfere in their personal relationship with Ivan because it only irritates and interferes with normal communication between them. In addition, she asked him to keep quiet until she knew the whole truth. Otherwise, she was ready to literally pull his hair out because he had no idea about what was happening behind her back. She began to shout at her brother, asking if this girl was the crown prince's new chosen one, and reproached him for not taking the situation seriously. Melissa added that they left her brother alone because of his teenage stupidity, and now he has completely lost his bearings, not understanding what is going on around him. The girl could not calm down, her emotions were boiling, and she continued to worry about the fact that everything had gotten out of control and had become unpredictable. At this time, her brother was silent, watching her violent reaction, but did not enter into the conversation, as if thinking about how best to act in the current situation. He suddenly expressed doubts about her sanity, hinting that perhaps she really was beginning to lose touch with reality due to her emotions. Now the brother was completely sure that something was wrong with his sister, and her behavior indicated obvious inadequacy, which further complicated their relationship. There was a strong hostility between them. They glared at each other without saying a word, but the tension between them was palpable and heavy. Melissa sat down on the sofa and admitted that she knew how much her brother disliked her, but she also had similar feelings for him, not hiding her inner resentment and disappointment. Despite this, she still felt sorry for him because they were related by blood, but he did not show due respect and forgiveness as an older member of the family should. She stated that it was because of this that she no longer considered him a real brother, especially after he betrayed her by stabbing her in the back, showing himself to be a coward and a weakling. Jake was clearly confused by her words, not knowing what to answer, and was frightened by Melissa's harshness and determination in her feelings and words. Melissa was sure that he understood that informing on her to the Duke was mean and unworthy, and it would only worsen their already tense relationship. She turned to his lordship, finally deciding to say what she had been meaning to say for a long time, but had been putting off. There was determination in her voice, and it created a tense atmosphere in the room. Suddenly, he spilled coffee on himself. Whether by accident or on purpose, it was unclear. The stain spread quickly, but the attention of those present was already riveted on her words, and the moment proved to be crucial. Despite this incident, she did not stop her speech, determined to finish what she had started. Her voice was firm, and she was ready not to retreat in order to convey her feelings and decisions to everyone. She announced that she was going to break off her engagement to the prince because she could no longer tolerate the situation. This announcement was a shock to everyone and broke the usual order. She emphasized that she was not asking for help, but warned that if anyone interfered with her decision, it would lead to trouble for them. Her words sounded threatening but sincere. After these words, she smiled sincerely, and this smile was so unusual that the father who heard it was in complete shock and confusion. She advised her father to keep his displeasure to himself and not interfere any further, after which she calmly said goodbye and headed for the exit, leaving no doubt about the seriousness of her intentions. With a light and sincere smile, she opened the doors and left, leaving everyone in the room in a state of shock and bewilderment, without looking back and not allowing anyone to stop her decisive step. Meanwhile, her brother, maid, and father stood there shocked and confused by what had happened, not understanding how everything could have changed so abruptly and what to do next. It felt like she was a little more aggressive than she intended, but then she thought that the situation would somehow resolve itself, even if it looked difficult now. Perhaps it all seemed like a nightmare, and only with time did she begin to realize the reality of what was happening, although at first it seemed impossible and unrealistic. It really did resemble some kind of nightmare, from which I wanted to immediately wake up and forget about everything that happened, as if it were a bad dream that had nothing to do with life. She immediately tried to wake up, began to make different movements, trying to break out of this state and return herself to the real world, where everything would be different and calm. She even hit herself in the face, hoping that the pain would help her wake up, and realized that it was just a bad dream. But the pain was real, and it made it even worse. In a rage, she realized that her cozy room had turned into a real hell, where instead of peace and comfort, an atmosphere of tension and fear reigned. All the walls were decorated with photographs of her ex-lover, as if he was following her everywhere, with his gaze haunting her and depriving her of peace. Not only the walls, but even the ceiling and floor were covered with his paintings, creating the feeling that she was trapped, surrounded by memories that could not be escaped. She was shocked and appalled that Jake could do this to her, make her personal space feel like he still controlled her life. She was filled with rage, but at the same time, she wondered where he had gotten so many posters of the prince in so many different poses, suggesting that this might be his personal collection. She could not understand how it was possible to make so many portraits of a member of the ruling family, and why someone could collect them in such numbers, and in such a place. When she tried to remove these paintings, she found that they were impossible to tear off. They were protected by magic, and this added to the feeling of hopelessness and pressure. Realizing that staying here was dangerous for her psyche, she decided to leave immediately so as not to allow this nightmare to completely destroy her inner peace and health. Melissa felt as if she had fallen out of reality. Time seemed to stretch out, and it took her a lot of effort to get out of that gloomy room where the oppressive atmosphere reigned. She didn't expect her vile brother to stoop so low. He not only left her ex, but also attached his portrait right to the door, causing a storm of indignation in her. Having decided to immediately find her brother Melissa, was faced with the fact that he, like a true imperial assassin, skillfully hid and did not allow himself to be found in any of the usual places. Despite persistent searches, attempts to cover all corners of the estate did not bring results. It was as if her brother was not there at all, which further increased her anxiety and confusion. She was surprised by such a disappearance, and assumed that he might have left the estate slipping away from everyone, like a shadow leaving behind only a cold trace. A feeling grew in her soul that her brother had simply run away on impulse, and everything around her was filled with an ominous, oppressive atmosphere that fettered her thoughts and heart. Melissa vowed to take revenge on her brother for his betrayal, mentally sending a curse in his direction, so that he would feel the full weight of his betrayal and the pain he had caused her. Then she turned to her maid. It was clear that the girl did not like to stand on ceremony and spoke directly without unnecessary words and secrecy. The girl's eyes immediately showed the words and feelings that she read in Melissa's gaze. It was a clear readiness for action and impatience. She asked if Melissa had seen a Tajik, and her face became gloomy and tense, as if that information contained an important secret. The girl said that the gentleman wanted to convey something, but immediately disappeared, leaving behind only a mystery and many questions. Melissa immediately asked what exactly he wanted to convey, hoping for at least some clarity in this confusing story. The maid explained that the gentleman had conveyed the words so that Melissa would not thank him. It was a mysterious and cold message that left her puzzled. The girl's anger reached its peak, and she hit the wall with such force that the sound of the blow echoed throughout the room, reflecting her inner tension and pain. The maid was seriously scared. The lady had damaged not only the wall, but also her own hand, which made the girl wary and worried about her condition. The girl remembered her brother's words well, and was going to recall them next time, preparing to understand his plans and intentions. She felt that her brother still thought that Melissa was crazy about the prince, and therefore considered her actions as an attempt to attract attention, underestimating her true motives. He probably thought that the lady would go crazy at the sight of his image, but in reality, the situation was completely different. Melissa's feelings were much more complex and deeper. She understood that her brother looked down on her, considering her a loser and narrow-minded, and this added fire to her inner resistance and desire to prove the opposite. Realizing the absurdity and cynicism of the situation, the girl began to giggle maliciously, throwing out the accumulated irritation and bitterness into silent but rich laughter. The maid didn't understand what was happening, but Melissa kept laughing, as if trying to get rid of internal tension and pain through this nervous laughter. The girl could not stand it, and with tears in her eyes, asked the maid if the lady was ill, worrying about her condition, and trying to understand what was behind her strange behavior. She was so scared that she decided to call a doctor immediately to help her cope with the unexpected situation. In her eyes, anxiety prevented her from thinking and acting calmly. But Melissa didn't stop laughing, realizing that she looked strange and incomprehensible to the workers. There was only one obsessive thought in her head that didn't give her peace. She was ready to do anything to finally talk to her younger brother Jake and explain to him everything she wanted to convey, clarify and correct. The aura around her became more and more angry and powerful, and even the space around her began to distort from her anger. She promised that she would turn her brother into a cutlet if he did not listen. At this time, Jake, who was sitting on the roof, suddenly heard something unusual and became alert, trying to understand the source of the sound and what was happening around. It turned out to be his sister Melissa, who nevertheless found him despite his efforts to hide, showing stubbornness and persistence. Jake was so scared that he didn't expect to see her here, in such an unexpected place, and in such a situation. He was overcome with fear and confusion. He was amazed at how accurately and quickly the girl knew where he was, as if reading his thoughts or following an invisible trail. Melissa explained that for a great sister like her, finding a brother is a piece of cake, and no one can stop her from achieving her goal. However, in reality, this knowledge was spied on in a novel she had recently read, so she knew where Jake could go and how to get there. They were now on the roof near the chimney, where it was cold and spacious, the perfect place to hide and not give his brother a chance to escape. The only downside to this shelter was that a fall from the roof could be fatal, and it was unlikely that there would be anything left of Jake in that case. It was here that Jake hid from his relatives, whom he hated and feared, trying to maintain at least some freedom and safety. He even called this place his secret, and once brought Una here, which became the most terrible date in her life, leaving a strong impression. Jake looked at his sister carefully and didn't say a word, choosing to remain silent and think about the situation before answering. Taking a deep breath, he asked Melissa to leave, trying to maintain some peace and privacy in this tense moment. But before she left, Melissa wanted to tell her brother something important that could change their relationship and solve a lot. Jake asked her in an irritated and tired voice what she wanted, showing that he was already pretty tired of her and was not ready to listen for long. Melissa was surprised and asked how he could change her room so ugly, making it into something she didn't like at all. She didn't understand why he did that and expected an explanation. However, he could not understand what the problem was, because in his opinion, the Duke was a very pleasant and worthy person, and he had no reason to doubt his behavior. But Melissa had a different opinion. She did not like the Duke at all. Her feelings towards him were negative, and she could not agree with his admiration for this man. The girl stated outright that she did not like the Duke at all, and she saw no point in continuing to maintain any kind of relationship with him or pretending that everything was fine. Melissa admitted that she already intended to break off the engagement, and she said this absolutely seriously, without any hint of a joke. Her decision was final and firm. It was unexpected for him and difficult to believe that she really felt that way. But despite this, he continued to insist on his point of view and was not going to back down. Melissa explained that her tastes and preferences are very specific and do not coincide with generally accepted standards, so she cannot simply accept the situation as it is. But observing his unwillingness to change and his behavior with other ladies, she became increasingly convinced that he was a scoundrel and that it was not worth continuing a relationship with him. Suddenly, the guy unexpectedly laughed as if he heard something funny or did not take her words and emotions seriously, which irritated Melissa even more. The girl did not understand the reason for his laughter. She considered her thoughts to be absolutely correct and logical and did not expect such a reaction from him. She reminded him that her brother Jake was even worse, a real scoundrel, because he turned her room into something horrible, which she compared to a Dravensian toilet, and claimed that she even smelled it. Melissa harshly criticized her brother for what he had done, and he remained silent in response, as if unable to find the words to justify himself or respond to the accusations. She stressed that playing room designer without her permission was a huge mistake and a sign of disrespect that she could not forgive. The girl added that before turning her bedroom into such an ugly mess, she should have at least thought several times, because it was too serious an act to do it at random. The brother remained silent, not knowing what to answer, and feeling that, with every word she said, it was becoming more and more difficult to justify himself. But suddenly, he asked why all this was necessary. Why it was necessary to turn the room into such an ugly mess, as if he did not understand that he had hurt his sister. Melissa was almost exploding with emotion, but she tried not to bring things to a conflict and continued the conversation, trying to explain everything calmly despite her inner anger. She said that these are simply basic rules of etiquette, that everyone should follow, especially in the family, and ignoring them is a sign of bad manners. At the same time, she warned that if he continued to behave like this, she would become even more angry and the consequences could be much more serious than they were now. But it seemed that this did not bother him at all, and he remained indifferent to her words and warnings as if nothing she said mattered to him. At some point, Melissa lost her temper completely and indignantly asked how old little Jake was hinting at his immature behavior. She began to explain that he was already an adult, but still did not understand what was happening and behaved like a child, which caused her disappointment. In the end, she began to laugh at all this absurd behavior. Everything looked so ridiculous and unreasonable from the outside that she could not help laughing. She decided to repeat her warning, saying that if the boy continued to damage her things, he risked losing his scalp. It was a serious threat that was hard to ignore. Suddenly, the housekeeper noticed the brother and sister asking what they were doing in these places. Our heroine saw a familiar silhouette, but could not immediately understand who it was. They soon realized that this was Martha the nanny who had once raised both Melissa and Jake. This was unexpected but understandable. Martha left the estate last year when the children grew up, but now she has returned, and the heroine has many questions about it. The woman often swore, but at the same time, she loved the Duke's only daughter in the estate, and finally a man appeared who could support our heroine in a difficult moment. The girl felt warmth and care from Marta, because no one else in the estate gave her such sincere hugs and tenderness. Melissa couldn't understand why Martha had returned. It seemed strange and caused her inner uneasiness and bewilderment. Suddenly, they heard an order, sounding stern, demanding that they go down immediately, leaving no chance for discussion. Despite their influence and willfulness, both heroes immediately submitted, not risking arguing with a strong-willed woman. Martha began to scold them sternly, wondering how the young lady could get ready so carelessly and allow herself to behave like that. She began to straighten Melissa's wrinkled skirt, believing that it was precisely such little things that spoke volumes about her upbringing and attitude towards herself. The woman slapped them on the shoulders and continued to scold their manners, showing that she was dissatisfied with their behavior and attitude to their duties. Melissa quickly apologized for her mistakes, and Jake followed suit, recognizing the seriousness of the situation and Martha's desire to see them be more responsible. Despite her apologies, Marta didn't even have time to unpack her things before she immediately began another reprimand, demonstrating her severity and firmness of character. However, their harmfulness and stubbornness required strict measures, and the woman understood that without such lessons, they would not improve. Suddenly, the heroine felt like she had heard something important and decided to ask again, so as not to miss the meaning of what was said. After clarifying what she had heard once more, Melissa tried to understand whether she had understood Martha's words correctly, because they were of great importance. Then Marta explained that there was nothing special about it, because sooner or later, everyone in life will have to get married and start their own family. She said that she heard about the decision to announce the wedding at a reception to be held at the Emperor's palace, which caused strong emotions among everyone. The woman added that she had been the heroine's nanny since childhood and could not hide her joy when she learned about this, so she immediately came to support Melissa. The rumors about the wedding made Melissa very angry. This event threw her off balance and made her feel internal discomfort. She didn't understand what kind of wedding they were talking about, which added to the uncertainty and made her think about the meaning of what she heard. Meanwhile, Marta sincerely congratulated the heroine, wishing her a large, strong family, and many children, expressing her kindest and warmest wishes. Melissa watched as the woman glowed with happiness. She was beside herself with joy, because the young girl was going to marry the man who everyone here considered a real ideal and a dream. The maid enthusiastically added that the groom had unusually beautiful eyes. They seemed to shine reminiscent of the sky before sunset, and his gaze alone took many people's breath away. The woman recalled how, as a child, Melissa often dreamed of becoming a princess, and she spoke about it with a smile and confidence that at the time seemed like just a cute fantasy of a little girl. These memories touched Martha's heart. Tears of joy came to the nanny's eyes. For her, seeing Melissa grow up was the most touching moment in recent years. She said that so many years had passed, but it seemed like it all happened just yesterday. How Melissa first put on a dress, how she learned to dance, And now she is a bride, so grown up and serious. The woman couldn't contain her emotions. Her chest was filled with warmth, and she was truly happy for the girl she raised. She didn't even expect how much this day would touch her. But Melissa herself felt differently. All this became a heavy burden for her. She was tired of the endless congratulations and feigned fuss. She felt like she was watching it from the sidelines. The heroine decided that she couldn't take it anymore. Everything around her started to irritate her, and as if cutting off the connection with what was happening, she simply allowed herself to go into the void, as if closing her eyes to everything. Martha, seeing Melissa faint, decided that the girl was simply overwhelmed with emotion. She thought it was all from happiness, not suspecting how much more complicated it was. It was a while before anyone decided to wake Melissa. When she opened her eyes, the world around her seemed slightly blurry, and consciousness was just beginning to return to her body. One of the maids quietly approached her, and bending over her, asked worriedly if everything was all right. Her face showed concern, since fainting was not a common occurrence. Melissa didn't want to wake up at all, and she pretended that she was still asleep. However, Gina, an attentive and smart maid, had long since realized that her mistress had woken up. For half the day, Melissa simply lay in her room, stubbornly ignoring the need to get up. She felt as if her body and mind were chained to the bed. Later, she reluctantly asked Yena how she knew she was awake, a question that was asked with a bit of irritation, since Melissa was trying to pretend very convincingly. Yena responded calmly by mentioning that she had her own methods for recognizing such things. She did not explain in more detail, hinting at female intuition. The maid's refusal to reveal the secret only angered Melissa. She was hurt that even such a trifle remained a mystery to her, especially now when everything was falling apart. The girl understood that this was unlikely to help her somehow improve her life, but the fact that the prince had managed to get around her again tormented her pride and fueled her inner anger. All she really wanted now was to stay in this warm, soft bed and forget herself. Her soul craved peace, and at least for a moment, silence and complete solitude. She remembered very well how Ivan constantly pestered her with his words about marriage, wanting to have a wedding the following spring. His persistence was tiresome. Their upcoming union was supposed to be a so-called love fest, but instead, it turned into an unpleasant pressure from the groom and caused irritation. Sometimes she wanted to go back in time and give her then-self an order to stop humiliating herself and begging for recognition, which now seemed so unnecessary and empty. However, she was now paying for her mistakes. Because of the stupid decisions and character of the prince, she did not get love, but only a bunch of unresolved problems and bitter disappointments. Now she was reaping the consequences of all these words and actions, like bitter fruits, that could no longer be thrown away. It was difficult to come to terms with it, but she had no other choice. But that wasn't really what irritated her. It got worse when the prince's behavior changes began to remind her of how unpredictable he had become. Previously, Ivan ignored her attempts to convey her desires, pretending that nothing was happening. But now he suddenly began to act as if he was fulfilling all her previous demands. He suddenly announced the wedding right at the reception, thus confronting her with the fact. It was strange because before he would have gone to the ball without her. By all the rules of the novel, he should have rejected her and shown up at the party with another more suitable lady. But now it seemed his behavior had completely changed. And even when she demanded that the engagement be annulled, he, without losing his composure, continued to hope that everything could still be fixed. His stubbornness knew no bounds. He probably thinks that if he speaks in public and says the right words, Melissa's heart will flutter again. This is what he is counting on, forgetting that time has already passed. The prince did not bother to inform her of his actions, deciding everything behind her back. Melissa suspected that her father Yakov had a hand in this story, covering up Ivan's actions. When she asked where her father was, Gina explained that his lordship had just left. He had mentioned that he had to urgently resolve an important matter in one of the provinces. This news made her suspicious. It was clear that he had simply decided to disappear while passions were boiling in the house. This entire escape had been covered up with clumsy pretexts. In addition, Yena added that she had heard about how the prince was buying up expensive clothes and jewelry in the most luxurious shops of the capital, as if he was preparing a luxurious performance. He also declared that his bride should outshine everyone at the ball, be the most beautiful, as if a beautiful rapper could solve all their problems. Melissa was almost shaking from these words. It seemed to her that she was about to destroy everything, but with the last of her strength, she held on, not allowing her emotions to break out. She couldn't understand why Ivan couldn't take her words seriously. Everything she said to him seemed to go in one ear and out the other, leaving only irritation. In her eyes, he was a real tyrant, a man incapable of hearing and understanding, and who did everything only according to his own insane desire, without taking her into account. Although she was the daughter of a duke, and could well afford both the clothes and the influence, she did not need handouts, and was not going to play according to his script. The thought that the prince had decided everything for her, without asking her opinion, made her even angrier. Her rage boiled inside, threatening to burst out and tear apart everything he touched. Ivan did not see her as an equal. He still treated her like a thing. Melissa was sure that sooner or later she would put an end to his insolence, even if she had to kill him. But while this anger was seething inside her, she needed to focus. In this disgusting situation, it was important to find a solution that could lead her out of the impasse. At the next ball, His Highness was going to officially announce her as his bride, so the event was extremely important. She had to be there, and this was stressing her out. But stopping the chatty servants and butler servants is useless. Most likely rumors have already spread throughout the empire, and it will definitely not be possible to hide what is happening now. Even if someone wanted to object, no one would believe it. It was too late to justify themselves. Everyone had already formed an opinion, and it was impossible to change it with one explanation. Melissa felt completely helpless. Everything that was happening seemed doomed and absurd. She did not understand how to get out of this web of obligations and expectations. She had considered breaking off the engagement before the ball, but that would require the consent of both parties, and achieving that would be a real diplomatic battle. After all, the prince would never agree to give up his power. He didn't need an alliance, but a demonstration of influence. She understood that she shouldn't expect concessions from him. There was only one way left: to force him to refuse. Not by force, of course, but to bring the situation to such a state that he himself wanted to stop everything. Melissa was tired to the limit. All this was weighing on her every day. She did not dream of a crown or power. She just wanted to live peacefully, without coercion and intrigue. She wondered, what if there was another way? Perhaps something completely unexpected would help her get out of the situation without direct conflict. An idea occurred to her. What if she just didn't go to the ball? Just disappear on the day when everyone would be expecting her to appear, and thus destroy expectations. In her head, the idea sounded brilliant. Not coming to the ball meant not giving a reason for an official announcement. Everything was simple and at the same time daring. However, the ball was organized by the Basilios family. They held 2 such events a year, and both were incredibly important to the social circle. In spring and autumn, girls from all corners of the empire would come there. To miss such a ball meant to cross oneself out of high society. Even commoners were eager to attend, despite the exorbitant price of the invitation. These balls were considered obligatory for anyone with even a modicum of status. Melissa could not afford to be absent. After all, she was already the bride of not only the prince, but also the duke. Her absence would cause a storm of gossip. Besides, everyone was waiting for her. People hoped to hear news about the upcoming wedding. The prince was already preparing to say the words that would connect their names. If she doesn't show up, it won't just be a scandal. It will be a public humiliation of the prince himself. The consequences could be devastating, and yet the idea thrilled her. She could already picture his face and the rumors of his disgrace spreading through the halls. Her heart beat faster. In desperation, she called Gina, and with a cold face demanded that her legs be broken. Then she would definitely not have to dance or appear at the ball. The reason was simple. She wouldn't be allowed to go out into the gym with an injury. She hoped that pain and temporary injury would be a lesser sacrifice than humiliation in front of everyone. But Yena refused. Even though she always followed orders, this was beyond the pale. And Melissa realized that even a loyal maid was not ready for this. Then she changed her request to open all the windows and prepare an ice bath. The cold could provide her with at least a temporary respite. Her body reacted immediately. She felt herself shivering from the cold, but only one thought was spinning in her head. She had to avoid the ball at any cost. Gina suddenly, with dead calm, suggested a much more radical solution. Get rid of the groom forever. Simple and effective. Each of her pieces of advice sounded with a frightening evenness. Melissa felt that Gina had long ago seen no other way out than to eliminate the problem forever. And now this idea no longer seemed crazy. With each passing minute, she thought more and more seriously about how to remove Yvonne in order to free herself. Perhaps she understood. She really had no choice. Either she would break the system, or it would break her completely, and no amount of persuasion would help. If Melissa doesn't start acting crazy, waving checks, and her hair in a mess, or hit Ivan in front of everyone, everyone will think that she is just another one of his toys. As much as she hated the thought of the ball, she knew she couldn't afford to miss it, even if every fiber of her being resisted it. Everything around her made her furious, and especially the fact that, for the sake of this bastard, she had to restrain herself, endure humiliation, and play someone else's stupid role. Her body refused to obey. She did not want to go there. Dark fantasies began to spin in her head, in which she could eliminate Yvonne with one blow. Melissa stood on the bed, trampling the pillow, as if it were his chest. With every step she imagined releasing all her anger, trampling on this traitorous flesh. There were only 2 weeks left until the appointment, and at some point, she simply left home, not even knowing where she was going. She just wanted to get away. Walking down the street, she tried to sort herself out. Her thoughts were all jumbled up, and Melissa just walked to distract herself, so that the silence and the wind would help her think calmly. Standing frozen somewhere in the park, she wondered, should she go and stage a public humiliation? Or would it be better to do something else that would be etched in the memory of all the guests? An idea flashed through her mind. Maybe she should spread dirty rumors. Among the invited guests, there would certainly be those who would believe it, and this could hit Yvonne. But she still has to go to do that. And if that's the case, she needs to choose an outfit to show up in. And then she decided that the packaging should speak for itself. It was then that the thought flashed through my mind. I needed to wear the ugliest, most disgusting dress that existed, to look like a laughingstock, but on purpose. Melissa was so absorbed in vengeful thoughts of destroying Yvonne that she completely forgot about her appearance and the impression she would make on others. At the same time, active preparations for the collapse scene were underway in the palace, while Melissa languidly sorted through dresses, looking without interest at the lush fabrics and frills. All the outfits seemed to her too beautiful, too elegant, too expensive for the performance she wanted to put on. She needed something ugly. Then she asked to bring her the most disgusting, ridiculous dress, but everything in the wardrobe was exceptionally cute and luxurious, and this only increased her irritation. In desperation, she decided that she would simply take an ordinary bag, cut holes in it for her arms and legs, and appear like that. In her mind, it seemed like a brilliant protest. The maid, looking at her with fear, asked her to calm down. But even she could not understand whether Melissa seriously wanted to come to the ball in this bag, or was simply taking out her anger. This time, Melissa felt surprisingly calm. Usually on such days, girls hired the best stylists, spent weeks looking for dresses, and then showed them off at balls with ostentatious pride. However, this particular event was different from the others. There was something special about it that defied the usual framework of lavish receptions and pompous social appearances. Some girls went abroad in search of unique fabrics, others wore family heirlooms, and some even fought for rare accessories, as if for the title of the best heiress. Melissa was sure that this time the ball would be a shock for everyone. It would not only be beautiful, it would make everyone talk about it for many months after it was over. The event was indeed highly anticipated. People had gathered from all corners, and now there were so many distinguished guests in the hall that every glance was filled with tense anticipation. Melissa was eager to see this through. A plan was forming in her head that could either destroy the remains of her reputation or give her a chance to speak out without words. For her, this was an opportunity to put her fiancé in his place. She wanted him to regret every word he said, so that at this ball he would understand who he was dealing with. The girl came to the conclusion that if he really didn't like her, then appearing in such a state would anger him to the limit, so much so that he wouldn't risk talking about her again. The maid was horrified. She whispered that Melissa's reputation would sink lower than that of the disgraced princess herself, and that this decision could be disastrous for her future. But for the heroine herself, it didn't matter. Her reputation was already lying in the dust, brother. Jake, watching this, was shocked, not believing how far his sister was willing to go. He muttered that there seemed to be no limit to how low a person could fall, especially if that person was your own sister, and you had no control over her. Suddenly, he let his hair down deftly and abruptly, and his appearance instantly changed, as if he himself was preparing for some crazy act or throw. Melissa looked at him with a grin. She was surprised that he had been stalking her since the fashion palace. She asked sarcastically if he had picked out a dress for her or wanted to look at some jewelry. Her laughter was harsh and mocking. The maid and brother stood aside, not interfering. Their silence spoke louder than any words. The tension was palpable. Jake didn't answer. He just continued to stare, not saying a word. His silent presence seemed to underscore the seriousness of the moment. Melissa knew exactly what she wanted to do to get Jake emotional. She watched him react because that was the only time you could tell what was going on in his soul. The guy continued to remain calm and did not allow himself to be provoked. He simply watched the girl silently pretending that her words did not affect him at all. A moment later, a slight grin appeared on his face, not out of kindness, but rather to add fuel to the fire and further irritate the girl. He mockingly remarked that she really thought he had come all this way on a whim, when it was clear that the prince himself had ordered it. The girl, pretending not to hear his words, began trying on a new dress, and turning to him, asked him whether he thought the outfit suited her or not. The guy, without thinking, said that the dress was just awful and completely unsuitable, but this did not touch her. She was absolutely indifferent to this person's opinion. Then she sharply told him to shut up and not to interfere with his comments, as if he had any right to judge her taste or interfere with her choice. Turning to the maid, she also passed on a message to her brother, making it clear that it was time for him to get out of the way and not disturb her. The maid, feeling that there was no point in arguing, reluctantly passed on the message, although she knew that it would have no effect on the stubborn guy. The brother, as expected, showed no desire to leave. He just continued to stand and watch what was happening, as if he was deliberately annoying his sister. Seeing this, the heroine angrily threw in his direction that if he really wanted it, he should put on this disgusting dress himself and flaunt it around the city. But the brother, as if he hadn't heard her words, simply demonstratively ignored his sister, not showing any reaction for a second, thereby infuriating her even more. He did not say a word, and finally an oppressive silence fell over the room, in which it became clear that there was no point in talking further, and the argument had reached a dead end. Then the girl resignedly announced that it was time for them to leave together because there was no longer any point in continuing this farce. The tailor, seeing them gathered, wished them all the best, with a forced smile, hoping never to see these two again. The angry brother and irritated sister left the studio without even giving the tailor a farewell glance, as if visiting there was something humiliating. As they walked through the city streets, passers-by turned to look at them. People looked with interest at the couple who had never been seen in these parts before. The city was buzzing with crowds, street vendors, and random passers-by. The air was filled with a noisy hum and hubbub, among which the heroine felt like an outsider. She raised her head and looked at the sun. Its bright light blinded her eyes, and she had to shield them with her hand. The weather was beautiful, and she was stuck choosing a stupid dress. The maid carefully reminded her that the ball was very soon, in exactly a week, and that the outfit for it should have been chosen a long time ago, but the girl already knew this. Despite the maid's words, the heroine was in no hurry to make a choice. She was well aware that delay was inappropriate, but deep down she simply did not care. The point was that she had no sense of taste at all, and so she didn't even want to try. Everything seemed terrible and not worth the effort. Her ability to communicate with people also left much to be desired. That is why she preferred to remain silent and not get involved in any conversations. Sometimes she could not hold even the simplest conversation, which made her presence in society unbearable and only caused her awkwardness. Forcing someone like her to prepare for a ball felt like she was being deliberately pushed into the thick of discomfort and stress. Moreover, she still hadn't figured out how to avoid communicating with the prince who would appear at the ball, and this thought haunted her. The situation seemed hopeless, But despite this, the day was truly wonderful. And perhaps this contradiction was where her true inner chaos lay. She stopped suddenly, and her gaze lingered on something strange. It seemed like an accident, but something inside her made her turn around and pay attention. Her eyes widened sharply in surprise, because what she saw was out of the ordinary picture. She could not believe that such a thing was possible here and now, as if it was a dream. Among the ordinary things, something unusual suddenly flashed, as if the object itself was calling her, asking her to look more closely. Her intuition demanded that she not pass by. The maid glanced at her, but didn't even try to understand what exactly attracted her mistress. She didn't care. It seemed she was just waiting for her to choose an outfit and leave. But when the girl came closer and looked at the thing, delight flashed in her heart. The clothes turned out to be simply magnificent. She leaned towards the man, but she was abruptly stopped. However, she managed to catch a sharp, unpleasant smell coming from the woman. It was as if her clothes had absorbed this stench, and it became clear that something was seriously wrong with her. His gaze fell on his hair. It was dirty and tangled, and gave off a terrible smell. His body seemed withered and fragile, as if it was about to fall apart from hunger. A man lay before her in a terrible state. The girl almost instinctively reached for her wallet to give him at least a little money to help him as best she could. But suddenly, a bright, brilliant thought flashed through her mind, an idea that could solve one of her big problems, and she felt her heart beat faster. The idea was simple, yet brilliant. This was how she could escape the persecution of the annoying imperial prince without directly tainting herself. She resolutely extended her hand to the poor man, taking the first step towards realizing her plan. Her movements were confident, and there was a hidden determination in her voice. The guy looked lost. He didn't understand what was happening, and only looked at her with bewilderment, not knowing what to answer or how to react to this kindness. She greeted him kindly and asked why he was there in such a state. In the same breath, she offered to help him as if she genuinely cared. Apparently, her plan was starting to take shape. All the details were falling into place. Soon everything would fall into place, and her plan would work precisely and without error. She extended her hand to him again, saying that if he was hungry, she would gladly feed him, because no one should suffer from hunger in her presence. The girl immediately ordered that food be brought to him, but the young man continued to silently look at her as if he did not believe that he had been addressed truly with kindness without ridicule. And suddenly, he slowly reached out and fastened his hand to hers. The gesture seemed to seal an invisible alliance, setting in motion a course of events that could no longer be stopped. She could hardly contain her joy. This was how it was supposed to start. He had become part of her plan, her protection, her tool, and now he was her ally in this game. Her intuition had not failed her again. Her look, her decision, everything had been right, as if fate itself had brought him to her at the very moment when he was so needed. At the upcoming ball, no doubt many girls will try to attract Ivane's attention, trying to please him and show off their attractiveness. But if you compare all these refined ladies with the man sitting opposite, then even the most handsome of them could not compare with his natural wild charm. Moreover, he was even more beautiful. There was something unearthly shining in his eyes, as if they reflected the light of the stars. These eyes, despite their fatigue, shone pure and bright. She felt almost victorious. Everything was going according to her plan perfectly. This man with a beggarly appearance turned out to be exactly what she needed for her plan. Despite her doubts, she decided to remove the bandage. Curiosity and an inner call were stronger than caution, and it was important for her to see who was hiding under the bandages. Since she had helped him and actually saved him now, it was her turn to ask for help. She hoped that this man who had woken up with her care would be able to repay in kind. When she looked at him again, it seemed to her as if he had been created by the hands of a master. He no longer looked like the dirty and barely alive tramp she had first seen him. This realization came to her suddenly, when he was still lying on the ground, and she decided to take a risk, to wash him, tidy him up, and check how beautiful he was under all this dirt. He may have been in a terrible state, but you can't hide innate attractiveness, and she needed an attractive partner. So without thinking, she led him home by the hand. The maid was shocked at first, not understanding why the mistress had brought the tramp. But after persuasion, including the promised double bonus, She quickly changed her mind and agreed. Having received consent, she ordered the boy to be sent to the duchy as soon as possible. A clear plan was already maturing in her head, and there was no longer any time to hesitate. Everything had to go as planned. As she rode in the carriage, a sense of satisfaction spread through her. She was especially pleased that her brother had perhaps lost someone he considered important, and now she had her own weapon. Once back, they began to put the plan into action. Every move had been planned in advance, and now it was important to act quickly to give no chance for resistance. While the tub was filling, they decided to figure out what to do with the guy. He resisted, refused to wash himself, and generally looked irritated, but she was persistent and did not give in. Come to think of it, Ivan himself had used betrayal to hurt Melissa. So why shouldn't she do something similar in return? This kind of revenge could work perfectly. Of course, she wasn't going to sleep with just anyone. She wanted someone she really liked, so she had to choose him wisely, not leave it to chance. A little bit of daring and a drop of imagination. And now the plan becomes even more vivid. She added unexpected details to it so that the surprise would be complete and absolutely devastating. All she wanted was for everyone at the ball to be speechless. From the unexpected spectacle, she dreamed of turning it into an event that would be remembered for a long time. No one could have imagined that she would come there not alone, but accompanied by her lover. This was unheard of, and precisely because of this, her act should have struck especially hard. Moreover, this guy looked almost like a god. Strong, handsome, with a mysterious look. He was the perfect candidate, and because of rumors and guesses, Ivan would definitely find himself in a difficult situation. This time, fortune was on Melissa's side. Everything was happening as if the world itself had decided to play by her rules. She felt that she was in control of the situation and was playing with confidence. Her plan seemed flawless. She had gone over the possible options in her head many times and convinced herself that everything was calculated down to the last detail. And at that moment, she was sure of it. What she liked most was that she no longer had to worry about what other people thought. Although she had no reputation in high society, she didn't care at all now. At the same time, she didn't care about the struggle for titles or influence in society. She didn't strive for power at all. She simply lived enjoying every minute in a new position for herself. In fact, it was important to her to show that she was not just another of Ivan's toys. It irritated her that anyone could even consider her something like an obedient shadow of his name. She explained to the young man frankly and confidently what she wanted from him. He did not expect such a conversation, and was clearly taken aback by her words. He even froze in surprise. Despite her confusion, his appearance evoked pleasant emotions in her. He seemed incredibly sweet to her, with a face as if he had just stepped out of the pages of a fairy tale. Melissa hastened to explain. She will not force him to agree. She is not interested in profit. If he agrees, then she will definitely thank him generously and truly. She made it clear that he wouldn't have to do anything complicated. He wouldn't have to learn etiquette or make speeches. He'd just have to stand there and not look confused. The guy, although he looked a little scared, looked at her with some deep understanding, as if he was trying to read between the lines, what she had not managed to say out loud. He didn't answer. He just nodded silently, and that was enough for the heroine to take it as potential consent, albeit a little embarrassed. She hadn't expected that reaction. It felt like he understood her too well, perhaps even too deeply. It surprised her and threw her off her usual decisiveness a little. However, she didn't know for sure if it was really consent. Maybe he just didn't want to argue. The question remained unanswered, and a slight anxiety settled inside her. As he stood there, Melissa suddenly noticed how beautiful he was. There was a special softness to him, like a ray of sunlight shining into the room. She quietly asked him to just smile. The guy immediately complied, and it looked so touching that she couldn't help but laugh. He was truly charming. Suddenly, she realized that she was losing control of herself. A nervous laugh burst out of her, and even those around her noticed it. But she herself did not understand the reason for this outburst. She quickly collected her thoughts and reminded him that they hadn't even introduced themselves to each other yet. This surprised her, because they had already exchanged such important words. However, the guy was still silent. It was obvious that he was shy, and the atmosphere was a little strange. After all, they should have at least learned each other's names. He looked down nervous. His fingers were shaking. His lips were pressed together, as if he wanted to speak, but something inside him was preventing him from taking the first step. At one point, it seemed as if he was about to say something. She held her breath in anticipation, hoping to finally hear his voice. But the answer was delayed. Melissa tensed and listened carefully to the silence. But suddenly, she sensed something wrong in the air. Her inner instinct kicked in first, and she felt alarm. She turned around, and her gaze fell on a terrible detail. The guy had no tongue. She was so shocked that she couldn't say anything. It became clear to her that it was impossible to recognize his name by his voice. At that moment, Yena came up with a notebook in her hands and silently handed it to the guy. The heroine did not immediately understand, but the maid knew exactly how to help and make the situation easier. She even added that the heroine should not thank her. After all, that is what such an assistant is, for who quietly solves difficulties even if they seem hopeless. The guy took a pen and started writing quickly. A few seconds, and a word appeared on the paper. His name was Marat. The name turned out to be unexpected, but somehow familiar and close. Hearing this, Melissa promised herself to be more careful with him. Now that she knew his vulnerability, she did not want to take a single extra step to avoid causing pain. Marat did not stop. He leaned over the notebook again and began to write lines in silence, trying to express everything that had accumulated inside him over a long period of time. He wrote that he was a nobody, just a street beggar worthless and forgotten by everyone. And now, thanks to her, he had a chance to start from scratch. He was truly grateful for that. When he finished, he bowed slowly. It was a gesture of gratitude, warm and honest without words. Everything he felt he put into that silent movement. Melissa felt a strange feeling. Even using such an innocent person, she did not feel victory, only heaviness, as if her soul was crushed by someone else's trust. She turned to the maid, asking her to serve food first, since it was better to have important conversations after everyone had eaten, and was in a calmer state so that nothing would distract them. Suddenly, she announced that the crown prince had already arrived to see her off and personally see how everything would go. This added excitement and special significance to the upcoming event. The main character was amazed by such care and attention from the crown prince, especially after she decided to ask to break off the engagement, not expecting such an attitude. She appeared in an incredible dress, created to delight and attract attention, easily captivating everyone present with her grace and charm. Finally, her long-awaited X-Day arrived. The moment when everything she had been working towards for so long was to be revealed, and the time had come to shine and show herself from her best side. With her was Marat, a homeless man with blue hair, and a secret she had recently learned, and he looked no less impressive, like a specially chosen companion for this special day. His grace and manners made him stand out from the rest. He was the most elegant guy in the room, which could not help but attract the attention of everyone around him. The main character even became a little carried away by him, noticing something unusual and attractive in him, as if in his presence the world became a little brighter and kinder. It seemed to her that he was like an angel, and she could not even guess to whom fate had destined this mysterious young man, who made her tremble. Her plan was bold and desperate, so much so that if Marat had known about it in advance, he would most likely have experienced severe shock, as if he had had a heart attack. If she failed, she would be accused and insulted, and even her families could suffer the consequences. But she had nothing to lose. After all, she was Canadian, and she asked Marat to simply trust her and go with her in the carriage. She felt a little awkward taking advantage of Marat's naivety, because in such circumstances, loving became not just risky, but an openly daring act. She quietly asked if he believed in her, and her plans needing support and understanding to move forward without fear of failure. Marat smiled back at her and blushed slightly, showing that he trusted her and was ready to follow her despite all the risks and uncertainty. At that moment, she felt awkward and realized that she should no longer allow herself to play such games so as not to deceive and exploit the trust of other people. In the midst of these thoughts, the maid announced that Lady Melissa had arrived, which meant the beginning of an important and decisive moment in the fate of the main character. Her hated fiancé always looked flawless, like he was straight out of a magazine. charming and confident with that smile that could win over anyone around him despite all their hostility. But Melissa had her own ace up her sleeve. Marat, who was not just handsome, but stood out with his unusual charisma and appearance, which immediately caught the eye of everyone who looked at them together. His attractiveness was so noticeable that it attracted glances even without any effort. And this is not surprising, because Marat combined strength and softness which Ivan so lacked. The prince was genuinely happy when he saw Melissa, and was finally able to ask if she was really there. His long-awaited appearance created a slight tension in the air. The girl, accompanied by Marat, instinctively pressed herself closer to him, as if seeking protection and support, which immediately caught the eye of everyone who observed their interaction. Ivan, noticing this, began to get nervous and tried to force a smile so as not to reveal his real surprise and growing feeling of jealousy, although this was obvious to everyone around him. Meanwhile, the main character herself smiled, realizing how awkward the moment was, and understanding how much the situation had turned out for all participants, and how many subtle feelings it had touched. She decided to be honest with Ivan, because he always did this with her, openly expressed his feelings, and expected the same in return, so Melissa did not want to hide her thoughts. Ivan was very surprised by her frankness, and the girl added that she was flattered that the prince himself had personally come to her, and this seemed to her an important and unusual event. He couldn't help but ask who this mysterious Rodin was accompanying Melissa, trying to understand what place he occupied in her life and why she was with him. The girl quickly explained that there was no need to think highly of Rodin. He was just her companion who accompanied her to the ball and had no special relationship with her. At the same time, she clarified that Rodin was her partner at the ball, and this was a key moment that greatly surprised the prince, who did not expect such news. The prince was left perplexed, not understanding what was happening, because in his opinion, Melissa should have gone with him, and now the situation seemed mysterious and unpredictable to him. He even thought that it was some kind of joke, but Melissa reminded him that he had never been a reliable companion, constantly disappointing her in the past. The girl also assumed that this time Ivan would most likely refuse to go with her again, would find another girl, and in order to be worthy of him, she decided to find another gentleman. She openly asked to correct if someone was wrong, showing her confidence in the correctness of the decision and her readiness for new relationships in her life. Ivan was very surprised by such frankness, and at the same time began to realize that he was perhaps beginning to fall in love with Melissa even more, despite everything that was happening. The girl said that it was not scary and not a reason for jealousy, because he always had a bunch of favorites whom he could invite to the ball, and this did not change her attitude towards him. She began to list some of these girls, such as Linda, who had long been among those who had tried to win Ivan's attention, but to no avail. The prince was surprised by this list, and Melissa assured him that Linda would be happy to keep him company, thereby demonstrating calmness and self-confidence. The girl added that they will definitely meet on the dance floor, and this will become another moment of their rivalry, which will arouse the curiosity of everyone present. The prince said that the carriage was in another row, and this was a slight hint at the old-fashioned but tasteless carriage he had prepared, which caused Melissa mixed feelings of irritation. The carriage, decorated with a corner snake, the symbol of the ruling house, seemed to be just a show which irritated with its inappropriate pretentiousness and reminded of the status that the emperor was trying to emphasize. Melissa replied that it would be strange and inconvenient for three of them to travel in the imperial carriage, which caused Ivan to feel humiliated since she was clearly hinting at their separate paths. It was very offensive to him, but he could not do anything because the girl was not going to compromise and made her position clear. To avoid such awkward moments, they decided to go separately, each on their own path, which became a new stage in their complex relationship and added coldness. Ivan was very surprised by this decision, and this made Melissa laugh, who realized that she had finally managed to shock him and evoke real emotions. She realized that she had caught the little brat and got great pleasure from watching the expression on his face after he realized that he had lost this game. The same footman who saw all this was surprised, because he again found himself a witness to all the complex events and changes in the relationships of the main characters. She chose a quiet place next to Marat, where she could collect her thoughts. In the silence, their presence seemed almost unnoticeable, but she was already making plans for how everything would go next. For her, this was just the first step, because everything was just beginning. There were many challenges and opportunities ahead, and she was ready to use every moment to achieve her goal. Immediately after they got to the ball, she intended to arrange the most severe tests for Marat, because she knew this world very well and could control the situation. She felt proud and satisfied with the way she was behaving. Confident and determined, she left no room for doubt and already knew that her plan would start working. Meanwhile, Marat was not sure if everything was okay with the girl, but he tried to maintain a smile, hiding his worries and showing calmness. Finally, they arrived at the ball, a place where there was a noise of voices and laughter because a large crowd had gathered. The atmosphere was lively and tense at the same time. Events were developing even better than she had expected. Her plan was beginning to bear fruit, and each step seemed more and more successful and well thought out. All sidelong glances immediately turned towards them. No one could fail to notice the appearance of the girl with her companion. This caused a lot of talk and curiosity. This was quite expected, because Duke Podobrat disappeared from sight, and she appeared at the ball on the arm of another man, which immediately caused shock and surprise. Her groom's carriage could barely keep up with them, as if they were the center of attention at this magnificent event. And this spectacle amazed many of those present. The main event of the tournament was that she showed attention exclusively to her gentleman, ignoring everyone else, including important people. She completely ignored the crown prince, and from the outside it looked so ridiculous that it seemed like a scene from a soap opera. Strange and comical at the same time. The situation was reminiscent of a dramatic scene from a TV series, where the characters play a complex game of feelings and intrigues, forcing those around them to watch with interest and surprise. Those who knew her and Avon well tried to pretend that nothing was happening, but behind their calmness there was hidden inner anxiety and worry. They circled around like vultures, watching and waiting for the moment to exploit any weakness or misstep, increasing the tension in the air. The prince was extremely upset. He felt irritated and thoughtful, trying to figure out how to fix the situation and regain his influence at the ball. Suddenly, he turned to the musicians with the order to start the dance music, because a ball is first of all dancing and an opportunity to show status and skills. Mashka, one of the musicians, tried his best to ease the tension, and gradually the tension began to subside, and the atmosphere began to lighten. Everyone began to watch attentively. People trampled each other's feet in their elegant shoes and dress hems, trying not to miss a single movement of the heroes. Finally, the prince turned to Melissa, inviting her to dance, which caused a wave of shocking surprise, because no one expected her to accept or refuse. She was surprised and did not want to dance with him, answering with a refusal, which greatly confused and upset the guy, whose expectations were dashed at that moment. This sudden rejection sent his self-esteem plummeting, and he felt shattered, as if the whole world had collapsed around him in an instant. The girl explained that her boyfriend did not want her to dance with anyone but him, thus protecting their relationship and demonstrating devotion. The prince was surprised by her words, especially when she added that Duke Podobrat would certainly not approve of her dancing with another man, increasing the tension. He looked shocked and confused, unable to believe such behavior, which was a real blow to him and a challenge to his status at the ball. After that, he burst out laughing at Melissa. His laughter was loud and a little mocking, as if he couldn't believe that she was so persistent in her point of view. He warned that if she continued in this manner, the consequences could be far from pleasant for everyone. His tone sounded threatening, as if hinting at the impending difficulties. Melissa found all this very stupid and senseless. For her, such threats had no weight, and she was ready to stand her ground no matter what. She added that even if she really wanted to dance with him, she would not be able to do so because the others were also against such a union, and it did not depend on her desire. With a slight dose of sarcasm, she asked why everyone around her was so categorical and against her participation in this dance, not hiding her bewilderment and irony. Suddenly, a young man approached them with a tray of food. Melissa looked at him, trying not to lose control of the situation, but ready to accept the treat. She immediately took one of the snacks, without thinking, as if it was a habitual gesture that helped her distract herself from the tension of the conversation. The snack suddenly slipped out of her hands and fell to the floor. She immediately admitted her clumsiness, as if trying to absolve herself of responsibility for what had happened. The Duke looked very hurt and insulted, although he could do nothing. He only watched silently, hiding his inner irritation. Melissa cleverly showed off her clumsiness by noting that she accidentally stepped on the same sandwich she dropped, and did so with a slight smile, giving no reason for conflict. She suggested that it was because of her constant mistakes that she was not advised to dance, since she allegedly had poor control over her movements and often stepped on others' feet. The Duke was very angry and clearly did not expect such an answer. His face expressed irritation, but he tried to remain calm and not to break into a scandal. At that moment, a girl who clearly adored the prince approached them and asked him to join her in the dance, not hiding her admiration and desire to be near him. The Duke agreed with obvious irritation, and without hiding his anger, went with the girl as if trying to get rid of the awkward situation. Melissa couldn't understand why he was pestering her if he was going to leave with another woman anyway. It seemed illogical and strange behavior to her. She invited her companion Marat and offered to go with her, wanting to distract herself from what was happening and maintain calm at that moment. Melissa kindly handed him a glass, trying to keep the conversation going and create an atmosphere of trust and understanding between them. Coming closer, she whispered in his ear that the guy was really doing a good job, and all the credit for it went to him, emphasizing his importance to the team. Melissa finally felt happy. Her words were sincere, and she expressed hope that he would later be generously rewarded for his efforts and support. She added that even if she had to spend all her savings, she would still remain grateful to him, sincerely considering him a wonderful person and a true friend. Marat blushed from such words. He turned out to be very sweet and shy, and this touched Melissa, making her smile even wider. His smile was so beautiful that it could melt the ice, and for Melissa, he became the best boyfriend in her life. They touched glasses to celebrate this moment and drink together. Suddenly, the boy's expression changed dramatically, and she couldn't figure out what exactly had happened. His gaze became tense and wary, as if something had scared or worried him greatly. She turned to Marat, trying to find out if he was okay, because she felt that something was wrong with him. Her anxiety grew because she could not explain this strange behavior. The girl noticed that Marat's breathing had become irregular and intermittent, which seemed even more alarming. She could not ignore these changes, and she wanted to understand what was happening. She asked Marat if he was in pain or discomfort, because his condition seemed unusual and alarming. She tried to understand the situation, but she did not understand anything. Suddenly, he started to move away from her, heading in the other direction, which caused her even more confusion. It seemed strange and illogical in this situation. She was confused and could not understand the reason for such behavior and what was happening around her. Everything seemed inexplicable and confusing, as if someone was keeping her in the dark. Perhaps it was related to Ivan, who could look at the boy with his piercing gaze, causing him discomfort or fear. But this version did not explain everything completely. But most likely, the reason was something else, because Ivan was busy with another girl now. This added even more mysteries and questions in her head. A new mystery was haunting Melissa. The guy looked very scared, and this worried her the most. She understood that she needed to urgently find out what was happening to him. The girl decided that the issue had to be resolved immediately and not postponed, because the guy's condition was clearly abnormal, and it was no longer possible to ignore him. She didn't know where exactly the guy ran off to and why he went to the restroom, which seemed strange and suspicious. She wanted to tell someone what was happening, but she understood that she couldn't pester him with questions because his condition was too fragile and delicate, and it was better to wait than to create unnecessary stress for him. Deciding not to rush, Melissa simply waited, holding a glass for the guy, hoping that he would soon return and explain everything that was happening to him. 2 hours had already passed, and the guy was still not there, which only increased her anxiety and feeling of loneliness in the crowd. People began to notice that she was standing alone, and although Marat showed himself to be an excellent assistant and knowledgeable in the customs of the nobility, this did little to console her. She assumed he had a good understanding of how to behave in society, but the situation was still tense, and she felt at a loss. There was a possibility that he had simply gotten lost. After all, it was his first time in this huge palace, where the corridors were all tangled and the halls looked the same. Perhaps confusion had played a cruel joke on him, but the second thought was much worse. What if he just ran away, leaving her without explanation, as if he was scared or changed his mind? This hurt more than the cold walls and empty looks. The ball was drawing to a close, and she was still alone. And if things continued like this, she would be the one humiliated in front of everyone, even though she so desperately did not want it. Realizing that there was no point in waiting any longer, Melissa decided that she would have to look for him on her own, no matter how much it cost. Otherwise, neither her pride nor her weakness would be forgiven. The certainty grew stronger in her soul that Marat himself was to blame for what was happening. The horror lurking in his gaze seemed like clear confirmation that he knew or felt something. Her situation was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. The high-ranking guests could already make guesses, while she, not knowing what to do, sat alone on the cold bench. Still, she couldn't just start looking for him. That would make her the object of ridicule. Every move now could lead to shame, and rumors spread quickly. If the situation continues to develop in the same spirit, she risks being known as a villain who was abandoned not only by her fiancé, but also by her lover, and no one will delve into the details. The last option left was to check the men's room, especially if he wasn't in the garden. What if it started raining and he took shelter somewhere from the bad weather? Suddenly, she noticed the girl at first, thinking that she might be Marat's beloved. But after looking closer, she realized that she was mistaken. Before her stood not just a guest. It was a lawyer, a girl with huge blue eyes, like two transparent lakes filled with silent wisdom. She looked like a water lily blossoming in the soft moonlight. Her whole appearance was filled with some almost magical tenderness. At first sight, she made a strong impression, not only on men, but also on women. Her beauty was that rare quiet magic that works without words. It was Yuri Elizabeth, the main character of another parallel story. Melissa even lost her composure for a moment, meeting with such sudden grace. She quickly recovered and apologized discreetly for her unexpected behavior. After all, it was their first meeting, and she didn't want to make a bad impression. The woman, as if expecting such a reaction, noted that most likely her name was already known to many. After all sorts of rumors were circulating about her in the capital. After these words, Melissa decided to speak first. If they had accidentally bumped into each other, it was worth using the moment to establish at least some mutual understanding. A slight awkwardness arose, but the interlocutor herself diffused the situation by adding that Yuri was actually much nicer than they said about her behind her back. The Liza family was famous for its influence. Each of its representatives possessed impressive power, and the name itself inspired awe and respect in every corner of the empire. All those born into this family, according to legend, were natural-born magicians whose abilities from childhood exceeded the norms available to ordinary people. That is why, if a child was accepted into this family, it meant that he had an amazing gift that could not be ignored. It was a symbol of exclusivity, and so this girl found herself among them. Her appearance here was not accidental. Melissa felt it. There was something in her gaze that you wouldn't find in others. However, ordinary people are not always ready to accept such people, especially if their origin does not match their status. And the low title gave rise to a lot of speculation. Apparently, Yuri herself was already tired of other people's judgments and looks. But now she had more important things to do, and this was reflected in her concentrated face. At that moment, the prince's voice came from afar. He was calling Melissa, finally deciding to talk to her. This call tore her out of her thoughts and brought her back to reality. Melissa couldn't understand if the prince really had gone after her to take her back to the ballroom and solemnly announce the wedding right there until Marat appeared and intervened in what was happening. Everything was going so wrong that even the day seemed to be upside down. It was as if fate was turning in the other direction, leaving her at a loss and without the slightest understanding of what to do next. At the very moment she looked up, Melissa noticed that Ivan suddenly looked at Yuri Elizabeth as if his heart had made a choice. He seemed to have fallen in love with her right at first sight. Their first meeting took place at the spring ball. It was there that Ivan first saw the mysterious girl who now stood before him like a living illustration of his dreams. This moment could be called one of the turning points in history. It was as if it was torn out of those books, where heroes meet and everything around them changes. And now it has become reality. Ivan was stunned to the depths of his soul, so much so that he suddenly blushed, unable to hide his own excitement. He himself did not expect that Yuri would make such an impression on him. He was standing right in front of her eyes, and Melissa, clenching her fists, watched it all happen. She was a witness to that very moment when someone else's feelings became obvious. It was as if someone invisible was whispering to her that she was no longer the main figure in this story, but had become only a secondary character who was observing but no longer had any influence on the plot. She couldn't understand why everything had turned out this way, but the feelings inside were heavy and bitter. She was torn apart by anger, resentment, and a sense of betrayal without guilt. Melissa felt like the ground was slipping away from under her feet. Everything that was happening was completely beyond her control. And in this helplessness, there was a special form of suffering that was difficult to come to terms with. After the ball filled with strange encounters and events, the girl was mentally and physically exhausted. She felt her strength leaving her with every step. Once in the room, she told Gina, her maid, that all that was left of that evening was pain, loneliness, and resentment that were suffocating her from the inside. The maid didn't know what to say. She simply nodded, confirming that she understood everything without words, as if she herself felt the same emptiness. Melissa asked in despair why she was having such bad luck. But Yena only shook her head in agreement, as if her silent sympathy was all she could offer in return. Realizing that the maid was just mindlessly repeating after her, Melissa angrily suggested eating the shoe to at least shake her up. But she remained cold-blooded, not reacting at all. Despite everything that had happened, there was one piece of good news. The wedding announcement never came. Although it didn't solve everything, it was a little reassuring. True, Melissa herself had no merit in this. Everything happened not because of her actions, but rather in spite of them. Even if everything went according to plan, deep down, she knew that this was not her victory. But for Ivan, everything worked out even better than he could have imagined. He was not disgraced, and instead of a scandal, the evening ended quite well for him. Melissa racked her brains. What could she have done that would make Marat suddenly change his mind? Was there really a reason that she didn't even know about? At that moment, she decided for herself. She should no longer trust anyone, especially men. Too often those who swore their feelings turned out to be only temporary. Anger was boiling inside her, and to somehow relieve the tension, she threw herself on the pillow. Her hands were shaking, and there were tears in her eyes that she did not allow herself to shed. At the same time, Marat, as if driven by an inner voice, ran further and further. He had already broken away from the others, and was not going to stop. As if he was running away not only from the palace, but also from himself. Marat needed to leave as soon as possible, before Melissa knew he was there. He was afraid that her life might be threatened again by his appearance. Soon he came across the red-haired werewolf Jack. Their eyes met, and the tension in the air immediately became palpable. A meeting was inevitable. Jack had always considered Marat a disgrace to the wolf race. His gaze expressed disgust and anger, as if Marat's mere presence spoiled the air for him. With caustic contempt, he asked why Marat was still alive. He expected that he should have been finished off long ago. Despite all the hostility, Marat sometimes caught himself wanting to go back to those who were dear to him, but he understood that now was not the time. It was impossible. He really wanted to apologize to Melissa, to explain everything, but he had a more important task on his hands. A battle was ahead, where the price of a mistake could be fatal. At the same time, at the ducal estate, Martha was still trying to find Melissa. The search for her had been going on for more than an hour, and her anxiety was growing. Marta had already called her several times, but had not received a single answer. This was worrying. Melissa had never allowed herself such coldness before. Finally angry, the nanny scolded the girl, lightly hitting her on the back. But apparently Melissa was just lost in thought and did not hear her. Her thoughts were clearly somewhere else. Martha, who had come a long way, came to congratulate her on the upcoming event. At the Duke's request, she was going to stay at the estate for a while, but her mood was gloomy. She realized that the prince had not announced his engagement, and this felt painful and sad to her. The woman quietly admitted that everything that was happening reminded her of a very sad story, as if what everyone was waiting for would not happen. However, she tried to reassure Melissa that the prince was probably just waiting for the right moment to discuss everything frankly with her. Melissa was convinced once again that she was stuck inside some fictional novel. Here everything was not according to the laws of life, but according to the strange logic of the plot. The groom who had recently been crazy about her now switched to Yuri so easily, as if the previous feelings had never existed. No matter how hard she tried to interfere, the path was already paved for Yvonne, decorated with rose petals, leading to a bright future with another girl. This realization seemed to strip her of all motivation. What she held on to no longer made sense. There was simply no strength left to fight for anything. Melissa decided it was better to relax and let herself rest. Breaking off the engagement would take time anyway, but Martha had a completely different opinion on this matter. Suddenly, Melissa's gaze fell on a neat wicker basket. Her face expressed surprise. She had no idea what could be in it. Marta said with a slight smile that she had packed lunch for her. She wanted to have a small picnic to distract the girl from her heavy thoughts. Melissa tried to refuse, saying that she wasn't hungry at all. Food was the last thing she was interested in right now. But Marta was persistent. She insisted that the girl get ready as soon as possible, because it had been a long time since they had spent time together just like that, without worries and talk about the future. The maid found the whole scene incredibly funny. She could hardly contain her laughter as she watched Melissa struggle to hide her despair, expecting to be served something truly inedible. With a grin and a hint of tragedy, the maid gestured to Melissa that she seemed to be living out her last gastronomic moments. Ironically, the girl herself was almost certain of this. Although Martha was indeed a wonderful nanny, she was absolutely incapable of cooking, and every meal she prepared was something between a test and a punishment. Despite her inner protest, Melissa could find no convincing excuse to avoid the meal. In the end, she could only accept her fate and obediently follow Martha. Along the way, she mentally addressed all the gods she knew, asking them to protect her poor stomach from the possible shock that would soon threaten it. Meanwhile, Marta was beaming with happiness. Everything made her happy. The weather, the picnic, the girls' company itself. She sincerely enjoyed the rare opportunity to spend time with her. Marta was one of the few people Melissa truly valued, so despite her failures in cooking, the girl endured. For such devotion, it was worth enduring a little. The old lady had probably thought of everything in advance. A light awning and a folding table. Everything to create coziness and give Melissa at least a little peace and warmth. Looking at her sincere joy, Melissa could not allow herself to ruin the moment. Even if she had to suffer, she was ready to close her eyes to everything for the sake of her beloved nanny. So taking a deep breath, she decided to try what Marta had prepared. Although reluctantly, she didn't have much of a choice. Suddenly, Melissa reacted with lightning speed and pushed Martha aside, shielding her with her body. Something flew through the air and almost hit them right. Marta burst into tears in fear, rushing towards the girl with an anxious look. Her voice trembled as she tried to understand if everything was all right with her ward. But the joy that Melissa tried to hide immediately disappeared as soon as the red-haired young man approached her. His appearance made her irritated and suspicious. This guy was one of those who always hung around Yuri. Loud and overconfident, Melissa knew for sure that she never invited him here. He boldly declared that it didn't matter, and then insulted her, calling her stupid, who dragged everyone into the house. His rudeness went beyond all bounds. This behavior made Melissa really angry. It became clear to her that this self-confident boor had no manners at all, and she needed to be stricter with him. He definitely needed to shut his mouth. She calmly but coldly told him to get lost and look for something else to bark at. She addressed him by name, which completely confused him. By switching to a simpler style of communication, she seemed to drop the mask and showed that she was not afraid of him. This hurt his pride. He did not expect such a turn. The red-haired man was amazed. He didn't even suspect that she could know his name or even be somehow familiar with his personality. He added with irritation that since she knew who he was, she should have understood that jokes with him ended badly, and there was no point in talking such stupidity. Jack acted as if nothing in this world could stop him. Not walls, not people, not even the fragile girl standing in front of him. He thought that her attempts to somehow stop him looked simply pathetic and ridiculous. Melissa was deeply hurt by this. After all, she knew that among all the werewolves, Jack was second only to the alpha himself in strength. His authority was considerable, but his behavior now crossed all boundaries. Jack was sure that ordinary mortals were nothing more than dust under his feet. But Melissa was not going to just stand by and watch him destroy everything around her. She was ready to intervene, no matter what. It all happened in the family estate where Gina Martha and the other servants were. It was her home, and she felt responsible for them. They could not be allowed to suffer because of Jack's whims. If someone dares to harm those she protects, Melissa will never stand by silently. Even if there is a werewolf in front of her, she will fight to the last. Jack, as if sensing her determination, offered a compromise. He said that if Melissa would be obedient and simply listen to him, he would spare the lives of all those she protected and would not harm them. There was no obvious hostility in his voice, and the girl began to hesitate. Perhaps he really did want to say something important, but she could not allow him to dominate her. Contrary to expectations, she decided to scare him with an unexpected scream. The anger that had been building up inside burst out. Jack recoiled, not expecting such pressure. She made him confused. At that moment, she felt invisible magic in the air. A silent attack was approaching, as if someone was channeling energy to neutralize the tension. And then, as if on cue, her brother walked into the room. His appearance was abrupt and unexpected as always. He looked tense, but he didn't yet fully understand what was happening. Jake was shocked. He seemed not to expect to see Jack in the house, and in such a state. The sight of the frightened servants and the tense sister added alarm to his gaze. The situation was confusing to everyone. Jack, despite his strength, did not shoot to protect one of the employees. It felt like he himself did not fully understand what he was doing, and he didn't even show any intention of punishing the intruder who had invaded the house. Jack acted strangely, as if he was overcome by feelings he wasn't used to expressing. The stranger wiped his nose with his hand, silently watching what was happening. He did nothing, just stood there with a tense expression on his face, as if waiting to see how it would end. Jake couldn't take it anymore and shouted loudly at the stranger, calling him a stinker and demanding that he leave immediately. He was angry and wasn't going to stand on ceremony with the guest. At that moment, Melissa noticed that her brother was showing signs of allergies. His nose was red, his eyes were watery. Jake was probably allergic to dog hair. The guest responded by raising his voice and yelling at Jake, demanding that he lower his weapon. But Jake didn't lose his head and ordered the stranger to throw his gun on the ground first. As a result, a real fight broke out between them. Their energy filled the space, each using their strength to the full, not wanting to give in. The air hummed with tension. Melissa stood aside, not interfering. She watched the events closely, trying to figure out who would win and what had led to this fight in the first place. The battle between them resembled a scene from a wild dream. Jake fought from a distance, using precise strikes and magical techniques, and his opponent relied on the power of close combat, attacking furiously like an enraged beast. Farmers were filled with despair when they saw what had become of their well-tended gardens. Bushes were torn up by the roots, flowers were trampled, and trees looked as if they had been through a storm. Their work was destroyed in just a few minutes. But it wasn't just the garden that was in trouble. Something terrible was happening inside the castle, too. There were pieces of furniture everywhere, torn curtains, claw marks on the walls. It seemed that even the butler himself was unable to cope with the chaos. The combatants showed no signs of stopping their rage, clouding their judgment. They continued to beat each other, not noticing how everything around them was collapsing. Marta, standing to the side, watched in complete shock, feeling that the house was on the verge of destruction. Melissa clenched her fists, realizing that if she didn't intervene, the estate would soon be reduced to rubble. She moved closer, determined, knowing that this fury had to be stopped by any means necessary before anyone else got hurt. The heroine burst into a scream, demanding that this madness be stopped immediately. There was such force and threat in her voice that it seemed she was not joking. If the fight continued, she could really destroy both of them. Then, holding back her rage, she demanded to know what exactly they had done in her house. If they had decided to sort things out, let them do it in private, without destroying everything around them, and without dragging innocent people into their disputes. She made it clear that she wasn't going to turn a blind eye to their behavior. Neither of them would get away with it, even if they thought they had the right to do whatever they wanted. They had both crossed a line. One entered someone else's territory without permission and immediately attacked the owners. The other, being a brother, did not bother to protect the family, but only gave in to emotions. She asked coldly if he was really ready to stoop to the level of this savage. After her words, the men froze. Their bodies seemed to have turned to stone, and they could not move from the spot. So strong an impression did Melissa make on them. It was as if they had woken up from a furious stupor. Realizing that her father was absent, the girl took matters into her own hands. She sharply ordered everyone to be quiet and listen to her without interrupting. Her tone left no doubt that arguing was useless. Following this, she said that if someone came to visit them, they should behave with dignity and not bark like a stray dog. Respect should be earned, not demanded by force. The guest, hearing this, tried to object, but Melissa abruptly cut him off. Her gaze became icy, and even the strongest felt insecure in front of her determination. She didn't give him a chance to respond and abruptly advised him to get out, before his skin ended up under her feet like a carpet. It was clear that the jokes were over. Patience was exhausted. After that, she turned to her brother, demanding that he come down to earth. The tone was so commanding that he, without waiting for a repetition, immediately obeyed, realizing that it was better not to argue. Both men finally realized their guilt. Jake even thought it was normal for the servants to be afraid of him. He was sure that in this way he showed his power, although in reality he only sowed fear. Melissa made it clear that they were both deluded. They thought they were the most powerful, but forgot that true strength comes not from destruction, but from self-control. She pointed out that their abilities should not be used for destruction and to prove their strength, but where they are truly needed, it was time to remember the purpose for which they were given their powers. The heroine began to scold them seriously. How can one consider oneself the best sniper or a powerful werewolf if those who are weaker suffer because of their behavior? Such an attitude is not a sign of strength, but of stupidity. Both men were stunned by her words. They felt ashamed. It was as if someone had lifted a veil from their eyes, and they finally saw what they had done to the house and themselves. Her condemnation was more powerful than any blow. Melissa didn't stop. She asked if they had already figured out who was worse, and turned to the wolf, ordering him to leave immediately. Order in the house was more important to her than these senseless squabbles. For a moment, everyone stood there stunned, as if they couldn't believe it was all over. But when she screamed, demanding that they act quickly, everyone immediately began to move, and without waiting for a repeat, rushed to carry out her orders. From the noise, shouting, and constant squabbles, Melissa's head seemed to be splitting. It seemed that the tension was pressing from all sides. Everything inside was pulsating with fatigue, and every new sound echoed in her temples like a heavy blow. To her relief, the two finally fell silent. It seemed to dawn on them how serious the situation had become. Apparently, her firm voice and sharp words had had an effect, and for the first time in a long time, they shut up. Melissa knew it wasn't a matter of respect. They hadn't expected such a wave of rage from her. It had stunned them. It was the surprise that had caused them to obey, not respect for her authority. If these two had thought a little, they would have realized that she was stronger than them, not physically, but internally. It was strength of spirit, not rudeness, that kept the house in order, while they both put on a show. Melissa's head was still buzzing, but suddenly she noticed that the people around her were starting to come closer. Everyone who had been standing to the side was now looking at her with interest and even admiration. This surprised her. The servants surrounded her with cautious respect, as if approaching a savior. Their glances were full of gratitude, and warm sincerity was visible in every movement. They no longer hid, did not turn away. At first she was confused. She hadn't expected anyone to react like that, but the gratitude in their eyes was genuine. They saw her as a protector, someone who had stood up for them for the first time in a long time. Melissa didn't even realize when everyone had managed to gather. It happened so quickly that she just stood there and looked at them, not believing that her action had caused such a wave of support. It touched them deeply that someone, especially from a noble family, would stand between them and the werewolf. They did not believe that anyone would dare to put the master and the werewolf in their place, and she did it. This recognition unexpectedly warmed Melissa's heart. She felt a slight joy, as if for the first time she was noticed not as a capricious heiress, but as a person capable of compassion and determination. After all, serving in the Duke's house is not an easy task. Every day there is like a powder keg. Every whim can turn into disaster. None of the servants felt safe. Take today's case, for example. The heir of the house. Jake was unable to even protect his own servants. He was too busy with his own personal disputes to think about their safety. Melissa even thought, if their salaries weren't so low, they would have probably quit a long time ago. After all, no amount of money is worth living in fear and stress every day. The work in this house wasn't just hard. It was draining physically, mentally, completely. So when someone stood up for them, these poor guys couldn't help but react. Their behavior was completely natural. In fact, Melissa often lost her temper. Her emotions were strong, and she sometimes couldn't cope with them. But this time, everything was different. Her anger brought not destruction, but order. Despite her inner turmoil, she felt a strange warmth from such support. It was nice to feel that her words and actions had protected someone and were needed. She tried to calm the servants, telling them gently that everything was fine. Someone had to take care of them, and if not her, then who? An almost imperceptible but sincere expression of concern appeared on her face. Melissa suddenly said that she really should be thanking them, because these people work every day, despite fatigue, fear, and humiliation. She understood. It is thanks to them that this house is still afloat, and without them, everything would have collapsed long ago. After these words, tears appeared in the servants' eyes. Apparently, no one had said anything kind to them for a long time. They needed these simple words of support, like air, and they seemed to believe again that they were not completely forgotten. When everyone finally left the bedroom, the girl felt a huge sense of relief. The silence she had been waiting for hung in the room. Finally, she could be alone and take a breath, collecting her thoughts. She sincerely hoped that her brother Jake and the red-haired werewolf Jack had actually heard her. It was important to her that they not just brushed her off, but understood that behind every word she spoke was concern for everyone. Melissa still remembered that Jack could reappear and cause trouble in his rage. If it came to a scene again, innocent people would suffer. She knew she had to think of a way to deal with him if he lost his temper again. She ordered one of her subordinates to contact the Duke. There was a growing feeling inside that without Yakov's intervention, they would not be able to secure the estate. Outside support was becoming necessary. In addition, Melissa wished to be introduced to the best swordsman in the entire empire. She urgently needed to learn how to protect herself and others if she had to face danger again. While all this was happening, she let go of her pet. Her faithful friend skillfully chased Jake away from the territory, not allowing him to penetrate further. It was as if he sensed the threat before anyone else. Melissa took her pet for a walk. He barked loudly, behaved restlessly, and at first she thought he was just overexcited, but then she became very wary. He always reacted like that, only in case of real danger. A terrible picture appeared before her eyes. A wolf cub was lying all covered in blood with scratched sides. The girl was overcome with horror. Her breath caught, and her head immediately flared with anxiety about everything that could be behind this. Now it became clear to her why her dog was barking so furiously. He was trying to warn to show that there was a threat nearby. Melissa's heart sank. She did not understand at first, but the animal was trying to protect her from the very beginning. From that moment on, she began to actively engage in fencing. With each lesson, her hand became more confident, and one day, with one swing of her sword, she cut down a thick branch as if it were not a tree, but a piece of fabric. The mentor was pleasantly surprised by her success. He said that Melissa was a rare student who had natural precision of movement speed and inner fire, which he had not seen for a long time, even in young warriors. It had only been a month since she had first touched the sword. But in that short time, she had advanced further than many other students, with the same amount of time. Her movements were no longer timid or hesitant. To be honest, Melissa herself never expected to achieve this. She didn't have any magic. Her style was far from perfect, and dance lessons in the past had been a disaster for her. However, Who would have thought that the fragile, confused, and hopeless girl she was before would suddenly turn into a strong and determined student who now confidently holds a sword in her hands? Many were shocked. How could a duke's daughter brought up for social balls and diplomatic dinners walk around with a sword on her belt? It seemed outrageous and against all propriety, especially for a bride preparing for marriage. People were whispering that with such training, she would soon grow, muscles become rough, lose her former grace, and finally lose that femininity that her family was so proud of. They were afraid that the noble lady would become a warrior bride. However, Melissa herself had long since stopped caring about their opinions. If it hadn't been for recent events, she would never have known what she was capable of. Now, having realized her potential, she continued her sword training with renewed zeal. Despite everything, Melissa felt happy that she was at least getting something done. At first, she dreamed of learning at least the basic techniques, but now she realized that at this rate she could achieve much more. Just as she was getting ready for her classes again, the butler appeared. He said that a letter had arrived from the Portal family. This family name was known to everyone. Almost all the werewolves living in the Empire hid under it. The bundle was tied with a dark scarlet ribbon with wolf fangs on the seal. This could mean only one thing. Its sender was the only representative of the red-furred shifter race. Jack. He had indeed sent her a formal invitation, and this after he hadn't heard from her for over a month. He hadn't shown up, hadn't written, and seemed to have disappeared, as if the visit had never happened. Melissa couldn't believe that he was capable of such a thing. After all, she expected an outburst, threats, even an attack from him, but not a restrained and polite letter. She was amazed by his strange patience. Looking back, she realized that the puppy she had picked up back then had come into her life at the end of summer. It was now spring, and he had not yet met Ira. It was because of this that everything seemed to be changing rapidly. While she was thinking, she was increasingly worried by the question, where is Marat now? After all, it was his wounded body that she found then, and since then, she could not forget a drop of blood nor his lifeless look. He was still in his wolf form and felt very ill. Even outwardly, he seemed weaker than usual, as if his strength was evaporating. It seemed that the pain had gripped not only his body, but his mind as well, dragging him into darkness. Marat still hadn't regained consciousness. One of the maids caring for him said he needed more time. His body was recovering slowly, and the internal wounds were apparently much deeper than the external ones. With each passing day, Melissa believed more and more that this wounded wolf cub was Marat. She couldn't explain why, but her heart told her. Every time she approached him, she ran her hand over his fur, trying to comfort him. When the wolf cub began to whine, she would sit next to him and stroke him quietly, whispering words that could calm him down. Even if he couldn't hear her warmth, her care, he certainly felt all of it. Despite her anxious thoughts, Melissa was determined to figure things out. She felt she couldn't live in uncertainty any longer, and knew it was time to get things in order and understand what was really going on. But first, she had to prepare for the important guest. Everything had to be perfect. The food, the atmosphere, the meeting. After all, this visit could change a lot, and therefore everything had to go flawlessly. She instructed Yena to prepare equipment for the morning training, praising the girl for her endurance. She held out in sparring much longer than Melissa herself expected, and was even able to temporarily go on the offensive. At this point, it seemed the long-awaited thing happened. The wolf lying in the room began to show signs of life. His eyelids fluttered, his breathing became deeper, and it seemed for the first time in all this time, he moved from his place. While Melissa was talking to Yena, the wolf cub slowly began to come to his senses. He began to look around, studying the unfamiliar space. His gaze wandered around the room, trying to catch at least something familiar. Another month passed. Spring gave way to summer, and everything around was filled with bright light and warmth. Much had changed in the heroine's life, but one thing remained unchanged: the determination not to let circumstances control her. One day, she approached Jacob, her father, and said that they needed to talk. The Duke was up to his ears in business, but seeing the seriousness in her eyes, he still took the time and listened, realizing that the conversation would be important. He wanted to invite his daughter for tea to make the conversation formal and calm, but she interrupted him. It was clear. There was no time to waste. Everything that was said had to be said at once before the determination melted like ice in the sun. Melissa said calmly but firmly that she didn't need tea or polite framing of the conversation. All she needed was for him to listen to her until the end. There was no doubt or request in her voice, only a demand. She reminded him that she had already told him that she would not stand aside if he tried to interfere with her engagement again. Any attempt to interfere would be perceived as a betrayal, and she would not forgive it. She also mentioned rumors that he had a hand in spreading lies. In her opinion, these rumors are not entirely unfounded, and if so, the act was especially vile since it concerned his own daughter. Yakov's behavior looked like an attempt to cover up his true motives. She believed that he was simply looking for an excuse to ruin her plans. All these concerns were just a pretext to achieve his goals through pressure. So unable to bear it any longer, she gave her father an ultimatum. No more hidden intrigues and manipulations. Either he accepts her choice, or he will lose her respect and trust forever. There was determination in her eyes. The Duke asked her in surprise what she wanted in the end. His response was so direct that Melissa couldn't help but smile. She realized that she had finally taken the initiative in this conversation. She said that she wanted to spend the summer holidays in her own way, with a minimum number of servants, and give the rest a vacation. The Duke did not expect such a turn of events. He was even dumbfounded by the very idea of such a strange request. But Melissa's demands did not end there. She added that there was one more important point. It seemed that she had thought everything through to the smallest detail long ago, and now she simply voiced each part of her plan in sequence. Her next demand was to raise Gina's salary. This threw Jacob into even more confusion. He did not understand why the conversation had suddenly turned to the maid and what was going on. He was losing his footing. Despite his surprise, the Duke did not refuse. He heard his daughter not because she seemed sweet or harmless to him. It was simply that before him stood a man who knew how to persuade, and he respected the power he felt. Everything in her voice and her eyes said she would not back down. Perhaps he even felt a sense of guilt like that first time when her words pierced his armor. Melissa hoped that this time he would at least feel something. Melissa understood that servants often treated themselves as a burden, as trash, and so she decided to give them a long-awaited rest. She did not want anyone to interfere or accidentally get underfoot when the wolf cub appeared. After all, it was too dangerous. The wrath of the wolf cub she called Jack was destructive and unpredictable. Anyone who got in his way could suffer greatly, so Melissa felt it was important to protect those around him from the possible consequences of his rage. On this day, Jack the red-haired Porton was supposed to appear to brighten their lives. With his visit, Melissa prepared for his arrival with the utmost care, thinking through every step, so that everything would go smoothly and without unnecessary problems. The hardest part was letting Yena go on vacation. Despite the fact that vacation is a rest, the assistant herself stubbornly did not want to leave Melissa alone, fearing that without her, the girl would be left without support at this important moment. Leaving this walking disaster with Jack was risky as he could cause real chaos. But Melissa decided to insist on her own, convincing Yen of the need to give her a break. After all, everyone needs their own moments of rest. Yena's character was certainly not easy. It was always difficult with her. However, the girl turned out to be such a rare specimen that it was impossible to lose her. She was one of the few who could really help and support Melissa in everything. Melissa asked Marta the nanny if everything was ready for the reception and received a joyful answer. Everything was done as she asked without the slightest mistake. This gave her confidence that the important day would go without a hitch. Marta turned out to be a very kind and sweet maid who took on the difficult task of replacing Gina in some of her duties. Melissa really appreciated her efforts and did not forget to express her gratitude for such help. The girl sincerely rejoiced at every word and attention in this matter, as if she was in constant delight from the opportunity to serve and be close to the mistress, putting her whole soul into her work and trying never to let her down. She said that she was happy to stay next to Melissa because when she saw her mistress, her heart beat so fast as if crazy. This admiration and devotion could not help but touch Melissa's heart. Despite all the joy, they still had a lot of things to do before the reception began. Preparation was important, and time was running out, requiring everyone to be as focused and coordinated as possible. 10 minutes before the appointed time, Melissa ordered to tell the guards to notify her immediately as soon as the man with red hair appeared at the gate. The girl hurried to convey this request to the guards so as not to miss the moment. She thought that if Jack, their flea-bitten guest, did not show up on time, or like last time, came in with a riot, she would meet him with her sword and stop any disorder. Such determination made everyone feel more confident. Melissa had no doubts about her confidence. She was prepared for anything that might happen and was determined to protect her home and her loved ones from possible trouble, even if it meant facing the red-haired wolf. Melissa felt completely confident in her actions, and if the wolf cub made even the slightest mistake, she would cut off his head without hesitation. Her gaze burned with determination, reinforced by experience and an inner strength that could not be broken. Despite her readiness, Jack tried to repeat the attack, just like last time. The girl deftly and accurately parried each of his blows, demonstrating a high level of skill and cold calculation in every move. His cry of pain was loud and sharp. The blow had really caused suffering. Melissa, however, remained cool, as if to say that this meeting did not bring her any joy and did not promise anything good. She knew that Jack had no regard for rules or etiquette, but she still wondered where he had the audacity to jump through the gate again. A dangerous and clearly reckless act that was surprising. The wolf cub was in complete shock. He couldn't understand how an ordinary girl could so easily repel his attack. For him, it seemed impossible and astonishing, as if he had encountered something supernatural. He was so amazed by her ability to parry that he couldn't understand what exactly had happened. It seemed like something incomprehensible and beyond the scope of normal combat. Jack was sure that this was some kind of dirty magic or a clever trick, but Melissa sharply ordered him to be quiet, warning him not to take things to extremes. She added that it was all the result of her long and hard training. But in reality, this was a blatant lie. The truth was hidden much deeper than a simple explanation of the skills, and this secret could change a lot in understanding her power. The thing is, the inconspicuous sword she held was one of the ancient treasures of the Basilius family. This relic held secrets and powers unknown to most people and had a special meaning to the family. Long ago, the emperor forgot about this weapon, leaving it forgotten for many years. And now few remembered the existence of the sword, although its power remained legendary and undeniable. Later, the main character of the novel wielding this sword became the best knight of the empire, and Melissa simply regained what was once lost, taking the sword back into her hands. In other words, this magical sword belonged to the hero, and it gave its owner incredible powers, enhancing her abilities and making her much stronger in battle. Of course, the more worthy the owner, the higher the weapon's stats. But even Jack was stunned when he saw how powerful the sword became in Melissa's hands. The wolf cub started yelling at her, trying to intimidate her, but Melissa quickly stopped this with a punch to the face, showing that she would not tolerate such treatment and was ready to fight back. The pain was intense, and Jack asked her if she wanted to die, trying to put pressure on her with threats and show that he was ready to take extreme measures in the conflict. The girl replied that if he really wanted, they could have a personal duel, but first he had to explain why he had come, showing clarity and determination. Melissa understood that Jack clearly did not come here for a friendly meeting or small talk, and she was ready to find out the real reasons for his visit. He claimed that he had written everything clearly and concisely in the letter, but the meaning of his message remained unclear to Melissa. Despite this, he insisted that all the important information was there, but she was not yet able to comprehend it. To clarify the situation, Jack pointed to his scar and indicated that he was willing to tell where it came from. This was an important clue to understanding what was going on and why they were meeting now. The wolf cub explained that werewolves' regeneration works great for light and medium wounds, but damage from the same shapeshifters leaves noticeable scars that do not disappear and become a distinctive feature. He was wounded that fateful day by Marat, a tramp whom Melissa had once saved, and who, as it turned out, was also a werewolf with blue hair. Now the girl realized that her companion was not just a tramp, but a werewolf. Jack added that they were enemies, and in their world, Those who betrayed the clan had their tongues cut out and their fangs pulled out. For this reason, he could no longer be called a full-fledged shapeshifter. He became someone else deprived of important attributes. The wolf cub also noted that it would have been better for him to immediately kill Marat by cutting his throat than to leave him alive with such a fate, because betrayal in their midst is worse than death. He didn't expect to meet Melissa, and from her reaction from the way she cooed at the balloon, it was clear that some kind of connection had appeared between them, as if they had become closer on another level. Jack asked directly if the girl was hiding Marat now, and if she gave him up peacefully without conflicts, she would have no problems. But Melissa clearly did not agree with such conditions, preferring to go her own way. The girl muttered something under her breath, and Jack, interested, wanted to hear it again. He came closer, but then Melissa quickly kicked him in the leg, which caused him to sharply anger and irritation. The lady sternly ordered him to shut up, explaining that he was annoying her with his constant chatter and stupid claims. Her tone became cold and decisive, showing that she was no longer prepared to tolerate his antics. Suddenly, Hay appeared and quickly tidied up, put away all the things, and cleared the space, as Melissa had requested, creating a calm atmosphere around so that nothing would interfere with further actions. All the furniture was neatly put away. There were no people left around. Hay knew that they had to leave them for a while, because soon she would have to teach a lesson to one disobedient little animal. A lesson that would leave no chance for resistance. Melissa beat Jack without mercy, striking with such force and persistence that it seemed that soon he would not endure. Despite this, he did not give up resisting and trying to continue the fight, although his condition caused pity in those around him. The wolf cub screamed and cursed, attacking the girl again and again. His rage was strong, and he tried to break through her defense, but each time he encountered her agility and determination, which did not allow him to gain the upper hand. Every attack he made was parried by the girl. Her movements were precise and accurate. She confidently parried the blows, not allowing Jack to get close enough to cause serious harm. Jack had only one thought in his head: to force Melissa to hand over Marat, believing that he was obliged to die for his actions. He saw no other outcome and was ready to take extreme measures to achieve his goal. Eventually, the werewolf's strength was exhausted. He stopped even moving. Fatigue completely broke him, and his only desire was to force the girl to give up Marat, although he no longer had the strength to fight. Melissa asked him how he knew she was hiding Marat here, trying to understand Jack's logic and check how true his guesses were. For Jack, everything seemed obvious. Having heard that Marat had fled to the city, he looked for him everywhere, examined every corner, but never found the slightest trace, not a single hair that could indicate his location. He realized that he had only noticed Marat when one of his wolf cubs recognized the fugitive on one of the streets. This gave him hope, but also raised questions about why he had disappeared so suddenly. Now, Melissa could understand why Marat had gone missing. There were good reasons for his disappearance, and there was some justification in it that could be accepted. That day, Jack wanted to kill Marat, but he managed to scratch him and disappear in an unknown direction, leaving behind only traces and a mystery that has yet to be revealed. Marat has a poor orientation in the city, and most likely could only go to the person with whom he was at the ball. This narrowed the search circle and made the case a little more understandable. Jack allowed himself to make a not very flattering remark about Melissa, which irritated her, and she hit the table with force, demanding that he be more careful with his words. Realizing his mistake, Jack immediately apologized for his harshness and continued his story, trying to correct the situation and establish a more constructive dialogue. He said that this time he wanted to check whether Marat was really hiding in the city, but unexpectedly he ran into a white-haired old man who turned out to be senile. It was with this old man that he started to fight, but then the lady intervened, kicked them both out, and said that an official request should be submitted to resolve the issues. Because of such misunderstandings and stupid assumptions, Jack burst into the Duke's courtyard, causing a real commotion and confusion there. Jack claimed that this time it was Melissa who started the argument, but the girl quickly silenced him and stopped the argument. Despite the conflicts, the guy always listened to her, realizing that trusting her and following her advice was much more beneficial than arguing and going against her. In the end, she was able to make him a little happy, perhaps with her words or actions that changed his mood and put him in a calmer mood. Jack was very surprised. His face reflected real shock from what he heard or saw. He did not expect such a reaction and was now clearly rethinking the situation. Although the guy almost guessed everything, there were nuances that remained a mystery to him and required further clarification in order to understand the whole picture. Melissa smiled slightly, feeling satisfaction and calm, and Marat felt the same mood, sharing this moment of mutual understanding with her. What he saw made Jack very angry because his guesses turned out to be true. He was even more irritated, but Melissa immediately made it clear that she was not going to give up Marat, protecting her new ally with iron determination. She clearly stated that Marat was now part of her circle, becoming one of her people, and that his fate was now tied to her will and protection. He was not just a homeless person, but a new, important member of her team whom she decided to protect. The girl added that she was not used to sharing what she considered hers. It was a tough and personal choice, so Jack had to forget about his claims and leave Marat alone. Otherwise, he would meet her unwavering resistance. In their society, all rumors and speculation belonged exclusively to the noble house, and any attempt on their honor was perceived as a challenge. Jack realized that he would not be able to bring it down now. Marat was subordinate to the family, which meant that he himself was connected to their power. Melissa was as surprised as Jack when she first met Marat. She was still glad that she had found him. This event was an important milestone because now she knew who she was dealing with and who she could count on. Marat happily talked about his experiences and events, and also noted that Melissa herself was much more surprised than Jack was now, because seeing such an unusual wolf in her garden was truly unexpected and unusual. The girl stated that this is the man she wants to see in her garden, emphasizing that Marat is now her choice and her responsibility, and his name is forever associated with her life and plans. The father, tired of her persistent requests, nevertheless agreed to accept Marat, albeit with some reluctance, recognizing that it was now pointless to resist his daughter's decision. He asked if Marat had the documents or recommendations necessary for official acceptance, but Melissa replied that he was simply her man, and that was enough for her. The Duke was reluctant to let a stranger into the house based solely on appearance and rumors, but Melissa firmly stated that she had chosen Marat not by his outward appearance, but by the inner qualities he had already demonstrated. She assured her father that there was no need to be afraid, because Marat would not be able to reveal any of their secrets, which made him a trusted confidant and a valuable ally despite his past and appearance. The man sat for a long time in thought, trying to understand whether it was worth taking Marat under his protection and how much it would affect the reputation and safety of their family. In the end, Melissa said that if anything went wrong, she would take full responsibility, and this became a final decision that neither her father nor anyone else could change. Melissa firmly stated that from that moment on, Marat became her man, belonging to her circle and protected by her like an important ally on whom she could now rely in the most difficult situations. Her father doubted that she would listen to his advice, even if he rejected Marat. Therefore, he allowed her to make the decision on her own, but restrained his attitude towards this choice, remaining internally tense. The girl was very happy about this freedom of action and thanked her father for his trust. It was an important moment when she felt support and understanding, despite all the doubts that were in the air. It was because of Marat that Melissa had to be persistent and determined. She asked him if he knew that she had taken part in his treatment, showing that there was a connection between them that went beyond the ordinary. Marat was very scared by this news, but Melissa explained that it was just a joke and that helping the wounded was a natural thing for her, which added ease and trust to their relationship. She emphasized that Marat should try his best while he is under her protection, because she has invested a lot of personal energy and effort in him, counting on his gratitude and development. The girl asked Marat to close the door, as she suddenly felt very ill, and weakness began to overtake her, causing anxiety about her condition. Suddenly, she noticed blood on her lips, which made her seriously alarmed, and realized that the situation could be much more dangerous than it seemed at first. Melissa turned to Marat for help, but immediately realized that he was very stunned and did not know how to act, which only added tension and uncertainty. His surprise was much greater than she had expected, and this feeling of confusion hung in the air between them, creating an atmosphere of tense uncertainty. Suddenly, the girl seemed to fall into her own subconscious, losing touch with reality. She did not understand where she was or who she was, but before her eyes appeared a picture of a little crying girl in the middle of a lake. This girl seemed distant to the adult Melissa, but at the same time very important, as if she herself were a child who carried pain and loneliness within herself. Adult Melissa looked at the girl, not understanding why she was crying, and seemed to ask about it, although the words did not sound in her consciousness. It was an internal feeling. The girl began to explain that she was crying because no one hugged her, and then Melissa offered her a hug, but the little girl refused, not wanting to accept consolation yet. Then the lady asked what she really wanted and was told that the little girl wanted Ivan to be brought to her, a name that caused mixed feelings and misunderstanding in Melissa. The main character felt embarrassed and asked who Ivan was, because this name was unfamiliar to her in this context, and the little girl explained that he was her husband. Melissa wondered why the little girl was so sure of this, and heard that she and Ivan were engaged, and that her love for him was so strong that they would soon be getting married, an event that the girl had dreamed of with all her heart. Melissa asked the little girl when she had last seen Ivan. The girl replied that it had been about 2 years ago, as if it were some strange joke that still seemed painful and incomprehensible to her. It was unacceptable for the heroine that Ivan could ignore his bride for so long, no matter how much work he had. Abandoning someone who was waiting was unacceptable for her and caused great irritation. She was about to condemn Ivan for this indifference, but at that moment the little girl suddenly began to gently beat her and calm her down, as if trying to protect the one she loved from anger. After a short conversation, the girl realized that in any case she would need to see Ivan, and until that happened, she had to give in and leave, as if temporarily postponing her desires. Melissa asked the girl not to cry anymore, reminding her that she was already an adult and was able to cope with difficulties herself, and she did not need Ivan because her strength inside was much stronger. However, the little girl admitted that she was very sad and that she could not live a full life without Ivan, because it was his love that filled her world with meaning and warmth despite everything. The girl did not pay attention to the opinions of others. The only thing that mattered to her was that she sincerely loved Ivan, and this love was the main meaning and support in her life. She said that she wanted to become closer with her brother, and she also really liked dogs. She dreamed of getting one of them because wolves seemed too scary and intimidating to her. At the end of the conversation, the girl admitted that she would really like to be loved, for someone to feel her true essence and accept her as she is without masks and fears. Suddenly, the little girl turned her attention to Melissa and said that she was completely different. She was not like the girl who was now sitting in front of her, but deep down she still kept her spirit and part of her soul. She added that Melissa is different from who she once seemed to be, and although a lot has changed, there is still a part of that little girl in her who was full of hopes and dreams. At that moment, it seemed that everything around was beginning to collapse. Reality became shaky and unstable, as if the line between the present and the subconscious was beginning to disappear. Outside, many voices were heard calling for Melissa, demanding that she return from the depths of her subconscious and come out back into the world where she was awaited and needed. The girl explained that these voices desire her because she is the one who cannot stand empty worship and does not tolerate injustice, that is a real and strong personality that cannot be controlled. The baby declared that she was much better than the version of Melissa inside her now, and promised that she would control this body much better than the one who was currently fighting with herself. In the end, they decided together to fight back against all who hindered them, deciding to show strength and unity in order to get rid of the fear and weakness that haunted them forever. Meanwhile, Marat and the servants began to worry a lot about the girl because they did not understand what exactly was happening to her, and their anxiety about her condition grew with every minute. The butler began to insist on calling a doctor immediately because everyone was very scared. The lady had not regained consciousness for a long time, and there were serious concerns about her health. But Melissa herself could not understand what was happening around her, Everything seemed strange and incomprehensible to her, especially after she had just dealt with an internal struggle. She asked to give her some time to rest, and then noticed that Marat was crying. This caused her even more anxiety and doubts, because she could not understand the reason for his tears. Melissa made it clear that she was alive, and that nothing supernatural or inexplicable should be expected from her. She remained herself despite what was happening, and wanted Marat to understand that she was nearby, and everything would be under control. She was sure that she would protect Marat at any cost, no matter the circumstances. Deep down, she knew that his presence here was largely due to her, and that was why she was not going to let him go and abandon him in trouble. Suddenly, the heroine laughed, watching Marat cry. To her, it looked funny and a little ridiculous, because his tears were so sincere and unexpected that they made her smile slightly and feel relief. She was acutely aware that Marat had a difficult road ahead of him. He had much to learn and accept in order to fully understand what Melissa had been through. She understood that their conversations were just beginning, and much more would be said. The lady felt that the two of them had many secrets to reveal to each other. Only frankness could bring them truly closer, especially after everything that had happened. There were many difficult topics ahead, but they would cope. Even with a great weapon in her hands, Melissa realized how powerless she could be in a fight. One unexpected blow destroyed all her plans for self-defense, because against some forces, swords and speed are useless. Normally, the wound could be healed with rest food and medicine, but in her case, everything was different. Her body, like a werewolf's, was filled not with magic, but with an alien energy, unlike human energy. This made any healing difficult. Those who are not werewolves are unable to withstand such energy. When it penetrates the human body, it causes not just rejection, but a real storm inside. It is like an internal war between forces of different natures. It was this conflict that caused the bleeding inside her. The enemy's energy entered into a fight with her essence, and her body simply could not cope, as if it was being torn apart from within, unable to find a way to recover. Melissa had little magic, barely noticeable grains, but it was enough to want the impossible. She wanted more than she could afford, and perhaps this was the reason for the weakening of her body. Yakov listened to her attentively, because his daughter had announced that she was going on vacation. She had already planned her route and was determined to stick to it. He understood that arguing would be useless, but he still tried to influence her. But Melissa didn't let him finish. She interrupted her father and said directly that she had already decided everything. This sudden decisiveness threw Yakov off balance a little, because he had not expected such directness and firmness from her. Then he finally asked where exactly she was going. The girl, without hesitation, said that she wanted to go to Liptin, a place that most people associated with loneliness and emptiness. Yakov could not hide his surprise. Liptin seemed to him a dead desert, where people go only to disappear or forget. He could not understand what attracted his daughter to such a place, deprived of comfort and familiar life. However, Melissa admitted that she was drawn there now. She needed space and silence to relax a little, clear her mind, and just look into the distance without feeling pressure and anxiety. She also suggested that she might have developed a strange allergy to wolves, perhaps related to her last trip into the forest. She was tired of the constant stress, and now her father was beginning to understand her position. The girl also knew that Elizabeth's estate was located in Liptin. There was a chance that they would accept her as a guest, but without permission, it would be impossible to do so. She understood that she would have to act officially. Melissa was sure that she had read all the necessary documents and knew about the abilities of the mistress of the estate. According to rumors, she possessed a rare power. She could heal without pain, as if she touched the very source of life. Melissa assumed that if her guess was correct, then the estate would indeed be able to restore even the language. Therefore, she did not want to delay. The road required an urgent start, and delay could cost too much. Their team, as expected, coped with the preparation for the journey quickly and harmoniously. These were not just random companions. Everyone understood their business and did not ask unnecessary questions. Everything was assembled in a matter of hours. There were rumors that many people wanted to accompany her on this journey. But she deliberately chose only 2 companions so as not to create unnecessary tension and not to attract unnecessary attention to her trip. The trio were constantly getting into strange troubles that they themselves created. They were hardly ideal allies, but together they managed better than alone. Melissa even gave them a playful nickname, the Problem Trio. She was most concerned about how fast they could get there. It would take at least 2 days to get to Neptune. Melissa knew about her maid's skills, but she didn't suspect that she was also a skilled coachwoman. She found it too tiring to travel for 2 days. To spur the maid on to go faster, she offered her a generous reward, hoping that it would provide that extra motivation. Gina answered confidently. The standard route could be forgotten because she would do it in 6 hours. These words surprised Melissa but encouraged her. At this pace, the trip could end faster than she feared. While they were settling the last details, Melissa and Marat had already settled into the carriage. He looked a little nervous, but remained silent. Ahead of them lay a road full of unknowns. In a strange way, it all felt like a scene from their past, as if someone had lived through something like this before. The moment seemed torn from an old memory, too precise to be a coincidence. Then Jack carried Yuri in the same cart, saving her from Melissa's annoying attention. This picture now seemed to come to life again, only in different circumstances, and with different participants. Suddenly, Melissa was racked with pain. The pain came sharply and mercilessly, causing Marat to rush to her in panic. He didn't know how to help, and this caused him real horror. This unknown reaction continued to manifest itself more and more often. It came unexpectedly, like a wave that could not be contained. Its nature was unpredictable and frightening. It became clear that Melissa's time was running out. The blow she had received was beginning to destroy her from the inside. The disease was progressing rapidly, leaving little chance of recovery. When the carriage pulled up to the estate, her condition was critical. She could barely stand on her feet, her face was pale, her breathing was heavy. It was becoming obvious that she couldn't go any further. Despite her weakness, she managed to sleep a little. However, soon the carriage stopped. Something outside the window caught Gina's attention. This seemed strange to Melissa because the maid said it too calmly. Usually, Gina's voice sounded even almost indifferent. But now there was clearly worry hidden behind the calm. Melissa felt that something serious had happened, since even her voice had changed. Their wagon was surrounded by a group of people who were clearly not going to be friendly. It was clear from their tone and actions that this was an ambush, and they were demanding that they come outside. Surrounded on all sides, they were trapped. The bandits did not seem inclined to negotiate. Marat immediately became angry and was ready to attack. But Melissa stopped him with a gesture. She quickly looked over the attackers. Their worn clothes, unsteady movements, and cheap weapons marked them not as professionals, but as petty thieves. They were just desperate men, not a real threat. However, she had no intention of pitying them. Since they had decided to attack, they would bear the consequences. Even if they had been ordinary people in the past, they had now chosen the path of violence. Melissa had not forgotten her promise. She had sworn to protect Marat at any cost. And now, despite the pain and weakness, she was ready to keep her word, even if she had to fight. Although Marat was not a full werewolf, recent events had left him without fangs, and thus some of his strength. This worried Melissa, as his fangs were important for his defense. She was also afraid that his handsome face might be damaged in battle. The bandits showed no respect at all. They shouted insults and rudeness without any intention of engaging in dialogue. For Melissa, this behavior seemed disgusting, typical, and too predictable for dirty bandits. When she pulled out her sword, one of the leaders couldn't help but laugh. He didn't take her seriously and cynically noted that he had never seen a girl as beautiful as her in Liptin, as if her appearance somehow diminished her fighting ability. Already, at the moment when Melissa had been tied up, the bandits were discussing how much she could cost. If they could sell such a jewel, then each of them would be able to live in luxury. Greed clouded their minds. And yet the most important thing for her was not her own safety, but the fact that among the stolen was Yuri, the very girl they were supposed to save. When Melissa saw her, she realized that the situation had gotten out of control. She was confused as to why Yuri had been captured. Maybe everything that was happening was connected to the fact that Usually the one who decides fate is not the one in charge, but the one who is saved? On this day, everything should have been different, but the patterns were still repeating. Unlike the scenes in the old naval, where men always showed up on time and got her out of trouble, this was different. The male characters were weak, and Melissa had to take the initiative herself. Treating the bandits as scum, she dispatched each one with incredible speed and anger. Her sword flashed, as if it knew what to do. She was exhausted, but she did not retreat. Justice was more important. Those she spared begged for mercy. They were so pitiful that they even acknowledged her as their mistress. Melissa did not expect that her enemies would be so weak. This did not cause anger, but genuine surprise. Despite her strength and anger, Melissa didn't kill anyone. She only disabled them, breaking their limbs, leaving them helpless. Now they definitely won't be able to attack anyone, at least for the next few months. Melissa wasted no time and immediately freed Yuri. Fortunately, she looked unharmed and not too scared. Seeing her okay, Melissa sighed in relief. Another step towards completing her task was completed. Her whole appearance was far from noble, but she introduced herself calmly with dignity, promising that Yuri could now count on her. Even exhausted and disheveled, she remained a reliable protector. Only then did Melissa notice how bloody her hands were. This sight could have scared Yuri, because everything looked cruel. The girl saw her in such a dark and frightening form for the first time. Yuri, despite everything, immediately asked if Melissa was okay. It was obvious that she was worried. Even in such a situation, she did not think about herself, but about the one who saved her. This touched the main character deep inside. Melissa hastened to reassure her that everything was fine. She assured Yuri that the blood on her clothes and body was not her own. Despite the early signs of weakness, she was physically unharmed. After the fight, she began to brag about her moves, telling how she easily dodged attacks and at the same time landed blows. Her speech was full of irony, and in every word, one could feel the pride of what she had done. But the fun didn't last long. While Melissa was laughing at the bandit's weakness, Yuri noticed something alarming. The main character suddenly started coughing, and blood appeared in her palm. It turned out that everything was far from harmless. Despite her weakness and dizziness, Melissa did not think about herself. She was only concerned about Yuri. She asked if everything was okay, if she was injured, if she was hurt during the attack. Even in this state, she showed concern for others. Yuri initially thought Melissa was talking nonsense. She said something strange and mentioned that she was just on vacation. It sounded too absurd in the context of the massacre, which made the girl even a little confused. A logical question arose. Why were such strange things happening to Melissa? Everything was explained simply. Two powerful streams were fighting in her body, magic and werewolf energy. It was as if they were engaged in a brutal fight inside her body. She herself didn't know what would happen if she continued swinging her sword like a possessed person, so she almost silently begged her body to hold on a little longer, just so she wouldn't pass out in the middle of a fight or an important conversation. But the body was at its limit. There was no more strength left, and despite the will, the body refused to obey. The eyes closed, and the main character fell unconscious, finally losing touch with what was happening around her. When she woke up, she found herself in an unfamiliar room. The ceiling was foreign, the walls unrecognizable. Melissa didn't understand where she was, and the feeling of anxiety quickly gained strength. Her mind frantically tried to understand what was happening. Yuri soon appeared and calmly explained that they were at Elizabeth's estate right in Liptin. Her voice was soft, as if she was afraid to upset Melissa, who had already been through a lot. This news made the main character happy. But at some point, Yuri said something strange again, which made her feel uneasy. Melissa was even scared when she heard that she would allegedly be knocked out again, but it turned out that it was just a joke. In the end, Melissa slept for 3 full days. It seemed like an eternity to her. Usually, she recovered quickly, but now her body seemed to have completely broken down, tired from the internal struggle. All her companions were worried, but Marat was the most worried. He hardly left the door of the room, as if he was guarding her sleep. His concern was sincere, because he knew what Melissa was risking for the sake of others. Yuri said that Melissa's condition was getting worse every day, and it was scary to look at her. That's why yesterday she decided not to let Marat in, so that he wouldn't see her so exhausted. Hearing this, Melissa thanked her for her concern, but Yuri just waved it off, saying that it was nothing compared to what the heroine herself had done. After all, in this story, it was she who saved Yuri from a terrible fate. Moreover, Yuri added that if it weren't for Melissa, Sir Jorge's daughter, Elizabeth, might not be alive. And now she's not even scratched. And the Baron has promised to compensate them for everything they've lost. For Melissa, this was the chance she had been waiting for. Elizabeth's family home was closed and mysterious. Its inhabitants were mages, similar to werewolves in their secrecy and strength. This house was surrounded by secrets and walls. Their estate was in a deserted part of Liptin, a place where even the emperor did not dare to go. Initially, Melissa just wanted to hide somewhere near the entrance and wait for Yuri to appear on the threshold. However, everything turned out much better. No one, not even herself, could have guessed that not only would she end up inside, but would also be a welcome guest there. Her plan worked halfway, and now it seemed that she had drawn a lucky ticket. Yuri curiously asked why Melissa suddenly started laughing. At that moment, the heroine realized that it was time to pull herself together and keep her emotions under control. The smile disappeared from her face, and she noticed that her condition was still grave. Not wanting to waste time, Melissa decided to explain everything as it was. She admitted that she suffered from a very rare and complex illness, and in her opinion, only Yuri could help. She would not trust anyone else with such a dangerous secret. The girl was happy about this request, but also confused. Yuri felt that it was a noble thing to help, but she was not sure whether she had enough knowledge. Her experience in treatment was too modest for such tasks. Realizing Yuri's doubts, Melissa quickly explained that this was not about ordinary healing. This was something completely different, and in their understanding, it probably had nothing to do with healing magic. So she decided to explain in more detail what exactly she needed. After the explanation, Yuri came to the conclusion that perhaps only the most powerful magic could help. She thought about using powerful spells that could, in theory, cope with the internal conflict between magic and Melissa's beast nature. However, despite her desire to help, Yuri admitted that she had never encountered such a case before. She was intrigued enough to want to explore the topic further, heading to the library in search of ancient knowledge. Meanwhile, Melissa felt a little relieved and allowed herself to relax a little. As soon as she recovered completely, she was eager to find out if it was possible to somehow restore Marat's voice, because this worried her no less than her own condition. Suddenly, footsteps were heard in the room, as if someone had quietly entered. The sound was barely perceptible, but persistent, as if they were deliberately trying not to disturb the peaceful silence. This immediately made the girl tense and anxious. She squinted, trying to see who had entered the room, but the darkness and weak vision prevented her from seeing clearly. Everything around her was blurry, and the figure in the doorway merged with the surrounding semi-darkness. In a panic, Melissa began to feel around for her sword, her hand groping over the bed and table until she found the hilt. Her heart began to beat faster. She prepared for the worst, because she did not know who stood before her, friend or foe. The unknown creature began to approach. Each step sounded louder and louder, and this only increased the anxiety. The unknown silhouette moved persistently, and Melissa was overcome by real panic, as if something terrible was approaching. She felt like it was an enemy who had come to take advantage of her weakness. She had little choice but to fight. Everything in her head screamed danger, and the only thing that kept her from throwing herself was uncertainty. But when the figure came closer, it became clear that it was Marat. He silently approached and hugged her. This gesture was so warm and sincere that all the tension instantly disappeared. Fear dissipated like morning fog. Volkolaka was shaking from what he had experienced. Tears were rolling down his cheeks. He was crying bitterly, because during these days, he had managed to be truly afraid for Melissa. His excitement and pain poured out in this embrace full of relief and gratitude for her life.